Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee on today, Monday, the 11th of November. First agenda item, apologies. We have no apologies, and everybody who is expected is here, which is probably a first. Item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask any members to indicate if they have any interests they wish to declare that are not already on their register of interests? Nope. Thank you. Agenda item 3, the minutes of our meeting on the 7th of October 2024. Does anyone have any matters of accuracy in the draft minutes? No, so we're happy to approve those. We also have as an unexpected bonus the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of February 2024. It was the joint, if you think back, we had the joint meeting with Audit and Governance to talk about the Combined Authority Constitution. That's right. Never to be forgotten. Does anyone have any matters of accuracy from those minutes? No, so we can approve those as well. Agenda item 4, public participation. We have no registered speakers at today's meeting. So we can move on to agenda item 5, City of York Council Annual Complaints Performance and Service Improvements Report for the period April 2023 to March 2024. And we're joined by Lorraine Lunt and Kath Murray, the authors of the report, who will give us an introduction. Then we'll open it up to members for any questions. For those who are new to the committee, this is a report that we receive every year, and it will be very familiar to some members, less so to others. So I shall invite Lorraine and Kath, please introduce the report. Thank you.
Good evening, committee. This is as explained by the chair, this is the annual complaints performance and service improvements report covering April 2023 to March 2024. The timing of this report is relying on getting both the local government and social care ombudsman's annual performance reports and information, as well as now the housing ombudsman services. So it does usually come to committee about this time of year, any time between October and November. It does seem like such a long time after March 24, but that's how it goes. So it covers your complaints, comments, concerns and compliments, both through the adults and children social care complaints process that are set out in legislation and regulation, and also the corporate complaints, compliments, concerns and comments, 4Cs, that are dealt with through any other corporate service provision that aren't covered in adults and children's, or where there is no other legal process such as housing benefits appeals, etc., that the individual should be going through. So if I take you through the covering report, we've highlighted some of the compliments, because I think it's important to know and acknowledge those compliments that the public, residents, customers and clients do send in. And in old school methodology and performance reporting, you used to always give that 8 times more weighting than a complaint, but that's a long time ago. But it does go to show that individuals, customers, clients, etc., will take the time and effort where they have a good service and have a nice outcome and expectation, where they will take the time and trouble to let us know. In the children's social care complaints section of the report, it takes you through how we conduct the assessments, how we assess the complexity and nature of the complaint so that we know what stage and how to deal with that complaint appropriately. And as you can see from point 2.5 in the covering report, the complaints dealt with through that children's social care procedure did fall from 46 to 40 in this reporting cycle. It is important, though, to note that complaints do fluctuate over the years and or through the year, and can be for a number of reasons, such as improvements made previously and lessons learned and themes of improvement, but also taking account of service provision at the time. So what I would also draw your attention to is that complaints received between April 23 and March 24 will have probably have been through services provided in the previous year, as it can take some time for those to come to the attention of the complaints team and or then be dealt with and investigated appropriately. We have undertaken some work to understand the decrease, i.e. to make sure that it isn't that the complaints process for children's and young people is not accessible. So we're making sure that the work with the children's rights team, the advocates, etc., continues, and also making sure that we continue with a programme of staff training and awareness, making sure that especially new starters are aware of this process and how to put people through and in touch with the corporate governance team. Feedback from the complaints, especially where there are related themes, do provide not just children's social care teams, but all of the services in the council with invaluable information to review and improve the services they provide. We also push all the time to make sure that when people are looking at changes to services and or looking at implementing new services, that they take account of previous complaints and lessons learned, themes, etc., so that they can use that free consultation to help improve the services they provide. There are more details in section 23 of the annual complaint report, annex 1 to the covering report. Moving on to adult social care complaints and the overview. Again, in the main annual report, there's a setting out of how and what we need to do to assess through that legislation and how we determine which part of the process and which timescales, etc., to attach to an individual complaint. In this reporting cycle, it did rise from 40 the previous year to 44 in this reporting cycle. Again, receiving a large number of complaints or an increased number of complaints isn't always a negative. It can be partly due to a reflection that the procedures that we have in place are accessible and available, but also making sure that individuals are aware of their rights to express their dissatisfaction through the complaints process. As you will see from point 2.13 in this annual report, there were concerns identified about the number of complaints not responded to within that time period, and we're continuing to work with managers in adult services to address this and make ongoing improvements for the next reporting cycle. You can see more details of that in section 39 of the report and annex 1. We also cover under adult social care public health complaints, and in this reporting period there were no complaints received for those service areas. Moving on to corporate services, so the most common one, as you'll see from the figures, is usually around bins and waste collections and services, and it has to be taken into account that that will always be a high number compared to other directorates and service areas, because they hit every household every week across the whole of the city. So that is why sometimes it looks a bit askew why one directorate has a large number of complaints coming into their service area. We also set out and explain in the annual report how we assess and put in at the stages of the complaints that we receive and the timescales for responding to those. The other part to draw your attention to is that we did have some cases of corporate complaints that were not responded to, and we tracked that down to being some issues with the upgrade of the case management system in the corporate governance team. They were missed through the transfer over into a new system. We've put in place, we've found all of those now, and we're rectifying those delays and or responses if they've not already gone out. And we're also putting in place measures for when we next come to a further upgrade of the case management system. Moving on to the local government and social care ombudsman review. As you're maybe aware, the LGSCO publishes an annual performance letter that they send to every council, and also all the performance data for that particular council on their own website. In the reporting period, we received 49 cases through the LGSCO that they investigated and looked at. 9 of those were considered as a detailed investigation, and 7 of those were upheld against the council. You can find more details in section 2 of the report in Annex 1. There is also the Housing Ombudsman Service overview. They have just recently sent the annual landlord performance data out and published it on their website. I think it went live last week on the 5th of November. Whilst the figures this year have more findings, i.e. points of fault and orders made for the council to put right than in the previous year, this is because when they report on the number of points in each complaint. So the cases might have fallen, but they may have found more points against the council, and that's why those figures look more this year, because there were more findings, points of fault. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the annual complaints report and the covering report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. So, members, we are invited to note the report and provide any comments or feedback. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies if I've possibly asked this sort of a question previously. I think in terms of the overall report and the overall data, it's all very clear and sort of relatively self-explanatory. What I was kind of interested in was, obviously this is the formal complaints that have been received by the council, and there'll be some areas, and I'm thinking particularly adults and children's, where for all kinds of a range of reasons, people may not ever get to the point of wanting to make or feeling able to make a complaint, even if they've received service that perhaps hasn't been what somebody else with more capacity or more willingness might have complained about. Do we do anything to sort of sense check whether the level of complaints that we're receiving for the number of users is what, roughly speaking, we might expect to receive? Or do we do anything to kind of, whether it's a forum or a focus group or otherwise, to kind of collect that sort of non-formal complaint, but the information about the service that perhaps one family might have complained about and another family might say, well, actually, I can't?
So yeah, in some ways, some of that is set out in the legislation. So what the legislation asks us to look at is allowing people to raise things that would be a complaint. So tell us about things that are going wrong without the need to use the word complaint. And those kind of things are captured in some of the concerns that are raised. It's also a part of the training, which is one of the things that we've really wanted to emphasise over the last year, really around making sure that where people are hearing about things, it doesn't become a complaint until a service area's had the opportunity to put things right, but about making sure that they're giving people good answers and that those kind of things are recorded and that that's clear. Those kind of things don't necessarily come back to the complaints team and be recorded with us, but they're recorded within the service areas so that they can be tracked there. And obviously the other thing that we emphasise quite a lot within the training that we're doing is about those kind of things where people are, and again, lots of the inspections and things will look at, well, how do you involve people in shaping services before it gets to a complaint? How do you allow them to tell us, to make suggestions about improvements? And some of that can be done within the comments and recorded within the comments. So some of that goes on within the service areas informally, but the comments section is a really good way of being able to track some of those. There's a theme here arising around what people might be saying, can you think about this? So it's kind of the comments and the concerns, if that answers your question.
I
Lorraine?
can also add to that in that there is a networks with the Ombudsman and also other local authorities where the complaint, it's titled a complaints manager, or there is a designated complaints role as well set out in one of the legislation. So there is regular network meetings with the Ombudsman, the LGSCO especially, and then network groups of all the different complaints managers across the piece of both geographically and much wider because of the joy of virtual and remote, being able to get a wider group of people together at the same time. And there you'd look at comparing and looking at what's your themes as figures going up, as figures come down, is this the nature, has anybody got any lessons to learn, can we do any sharing? And if there was anything in particular that we saw either a drastic decrease or a huge increase, we would do a lot more digging and investigation into those.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'll probably try and do a whistle-stop tour to the report myself to get them all through. So I think the things I flagged, for example, were on page 49. I think only one thing of note. So obviously the numbers in a lot of occasions are pretty small, so it's difficult to look whether we had 41 here and 42 the next year, etc. But I think the table on 49, what did stick out was the upheld stage 1 complaints in children's. That is a sustained increase. So in 2021, it was 36%. 21, taking the two across, the upheld and partially upheld, 21-22 was 33%. That jumped to 47%, 22-23, and last year was 64%. So that amount being upheld, there clearly are reasons for that. There could be many different reasons, but I think that is a trend that is worth noting. In terms of adults, on the flippant side, page 58, I was a bit confused that we have this very complicated RAG rating system. I think those that are ragged green can be resolved locally. It makes complete sense to me. Those that are ragged medium and high have exactly the same response. So either I think perhaps those responses need to change, or it questions why we actually bother to rag rate medium and high if the exact response is precisely the same. Surely a high level, because it just says needs a response from the corporate director. If that's the same for medium and high, then what is the point of going through the process of, once you've triggered medium, you're getting the same response? Page 60, one thing I was interested in, especially with Debbie in the background from a finance perspective, incredibly low levels of people in adult social care who are unhappy with the outcome of their assessment. Now, we're all aware of the pressures that adult social care budgets are under and the tightening of those and the amount of effort that's going in to make sure those are right. I would expect to have seen progressively sort of an increase in the number of people who are obviously being assessed at probably less care than they were hoping for, or less care than they were expecting. And it's just interesting that isn't there. And perhaps a question for us about, is that absolutely right? Because obviously we want to provide the best level of care we absolutely can for every single person. But that challenge in adult social care is if one person gets the absolute gold standard package, then that's 2, 3, 4, 5 people who get no care whatsoever. So I would expect it to be a bit more, and maybe to look at different authorities to see whether, because it's fantastic that nobody's disagreeing with our level of assessment, but that can lead you to believe that, are we oversupplying that? And that's why we're getting such great satisfaction levels. And then the third theme was around place, which obviously, as you said, is the biggest level of increase. Again, there's a big increase in the amount of complaints being upheld in place. I was looking at the tables on page 70 and page 71. 22, 23, 42% upheld or partially upheld, up to 67% upheld or partially upheld. Again, seeing that trend in terms of that. And the bit which I think really is an issue for scrutiny is the reasons behind that. And I was really interested, and as ward councillors, we will all know what the answer to most of that is. Most of those that were rejected were because don't go with policy. The one that was mentioned was damaged bins, and the very stark admission that we admit that we do destroy people's grey bins, we do throw people's grey bins away, and then we ask them to pay for the damage and the loss that we've caused. That's policy. We know as ward councillors, massive one, potholes, for example, will be one of the highest levels of complaints we have. And again, that response will be, which we all get as ward councillors, doesn't go with policy. It's not deep enough. It's not wide enough. It's not whatever reason. Therefore, the complaint isn't upheld. That will always happen. But what are we doing in terms of following that through as a corporate body and saying, you know what, if we have 20,000 individual residents who've complained about a policy, at what point does that sort of trigger a response where it's no longer acceptable to just go, well, you know what, we dismiss those complaints because that's not our policy? What point does it trigger and go, you know what, perhaps we should look at that scrutiny, perhaps we should have a think about that, perhaps that particular policy isn't right?
There's a lot there. And I'll also Lorraine and Kath can comment as they wish. I think there's probably as a broader theme, I suppose it's interesting to what extent does the feedback that comes through your processes, how is it received and considered by the service areas, and some of that may play out in other scrutiny committees in terms of if they're having a deep dive looking at waste collection and other issues and adult social care and children's services. But if there's anything you want to say in response, then please do.
So I think, you know, one of the main things really to look at is what the complaints procedure is looking at is where there has been errors in how a procedure has been delivered. So if you take something like the adult social care issue and whether there's a disagree with an assessment and somebody, you know, may not necessarily they may want a higher level of care, but are they saying that something's gone wrong in the way that they have been assessed? So that's what we're looking at in the complaints procedure. So I guess what we're not saying is that everybody is saying, you know, they wouldn't, if it was available, want a higher level of care. But what we're looking at in the complaints procedure is, has there been errors in what that assessment has been? So that might answer some of those about maybe why some of the numbers are, you know, you're not getting hundreds through because people are not saying the assessments not being done correctly. And similarly, I guess with, you know, where we're talking about the bins and whether a bin has been damaged and where some of those upheld would come in is so the kind of the procedure would be that if a bin has been damaged, but it hasn't been damaged in the course of being collecting, then we would ask somebody to pay for that themselves if it was wear and tear, if it was those kind of things. But if through the complaints procedure, we are seeing that actually that looks like it was damaged in the course of completion, and I think we talked about this potentially in some of the other meetings that we've been in, those would be upheld because we are then saying this has been damaged in the course of completion. The crew haven't seen that, we wouldn't necessarily have expected them to, but when we've investigated that, we don't believe that that's something that we would be asking the customer to pay for, and that would be upheld.
Thank you. Lorraine?
Just add to Kath's comments. The difference between the medium and the high on the adults assessment, both needing a response from a corporate director. It's just that is the person who has to sign off on the investigation findings and the draft recommendations that we send out, that they're happy to agree with those. So it can be the response goes from that same person at the same time, but it can be a different level of risk. On the other bit about seeing low figures, etc., sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, the complaints don't come through until maybe 6 months, a year, maybe even longer in certainly some of the social care cases, until either they feel confident enough to make that complaint and or they recognise that there may be an issue that they're dissatisfied with, and also the length of time that social care may be involved with an individual child or young person. It can sometimes even be up to 2-3 years after an assessment is done that we get a complaint in because there's an expectation there that something has gone wrong. The other bit around feeding back into decision making and other scrutinies, as many of you who are used to seeing me at audit and governance and or previous scrutinies for this, I go back a fair few number of years on all things complaints. I am continually beating the drum that says these must be used as free consultation information, use it as information to help set your decisions, policies, set your options out for scrutiny, decision-making processes, and that is starting to make changes. Service areas are starting to look at the complaints and other data that my team collect and report on to help inform. And what I'm hoping to see going forward, where the transfer of the services into, because complaints and all things 4Cs are transferring out of my team at the end of this year, early next year, into customer services. Those opportunities and benefits will be expanded on and exploited in a bit more detail.
Thank you. That sounds interesting. We may want to talk about that again. Was that a supplementary, Councillor Rose, or a new?
They're on the same points that Nigel raised that I was going to raise anyway, so it's
Yeah, go
sort
for
of
it.
pseudo supplementary,
Yeah,
if you like.
no, it's fine.
The first one is on page 58. We were just talking about the risk grades, and for the benefit of those with papers that are physical, there are 4 colours there: green, yellow, orange, and red in the table, which doesn't align with the green, amber, red in our CGT grades, and also the low, moderate, high, extreme doesn't align with low, medium, high. So can you just explain how they map onto each other? Is low the same as low, are moderate and high grouped as medium, or is extreme even higher than high, or what's the difference between those two?
So yeah, if we're going to do something as green, it would be low. Anything past that, we would be looking at medium or high. Because that's just the way that we would need to work with it within the council, in terms of effectively just looking at what level of response does this need to have, who needs to be aware of this, which is again really why it goes over to a director level for them to respond to. Anything that's kind of above a very low level, we really want more senior managers to be aware of it, because even if it's moderate, we want them to be able to see what's coming up and to be able to deal with that at that point before things. Because one of the things that tips things up into a higher risk category is repeated themes. So what we don't want to be doing is having lots and lots and lots of repeated themes and a director not to be aware of it. So those are some of the things that might tip it up into a medium, and we would still push that over to a director. So yes, we move it as we don't have the kind of, you know, the 4 different colour categories. We just do green, amber, red.
And is that equates to the seriousness in the Department of Health recommendations as opposed to the overall risk level, right? That's the severity of that incident.
The severity of that incident, whether we think there might be future risks, whether we think that there have been similar ones in the past, risk to the authority, risk to the customer, risk to other customers is what we look at.
Thanks. On the other,
Your microphone on.
thank you very much. Sorry. Yeah, I totally agree with the point before that a lot of these numbers are quite small, so trends are a bit harder, and trying to infer more is difficult. On the border of 72, 73, there's the outcome by directorate, and I just wanted to understand. I'm sure both of these questions have been asked a million times before in this report, by the way, and it is very thorough. And there's lots of good answers to everything else. On place, we've got 1,100 upheld, 100 not upheld, and the numbers obviously in terms of scale are way greater than the others in terms of both how many are upheld but also how many are there in the first place. What's in that box? What's the bulk of those 1,000? What makes them upheld, I guess?
So again, it's where we are identifying that we think that there may be an error. So again, what we were saying within place, you have got some of the waste services ones. So some of those will be, as Councillor I was saying, about some of those damaged bins, some of the damaged or potentially repeated miscollections, those kind of things, lost bins gone into the back of the wagon. And we've done that investigation, and we've seen that, yes, actually it is something that we've, has been through the course of emptying the bin. So a lot of those are in there.
Thank you. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned the new management system and complaints that got a bit lost. I think one of my residents was one of the people whose complaint didn't get responded to. When I emailed you about it, obviously responded very quickly and logged it. But I was just wondering how you know that you found all of those complaints that got missed, and what remedy there's been for those residents who obviously haven't had a very good experience with council, if their experience of services has been so bad that they've taken the time to complain, and then also that complaint service also hasn't worked correctly.
So what we've done with the support and the expertise in business intelligence and also from ICT is we did a cross match of cases and numbers and volumes within old case and new case. So we are fairly confident, I'll never say never, that one hasn't slipped through, but we're fairly confident we have now captured all of those ones that had been missed in that transition and implementation period. What we've done is taken each case individually and obviously offered an apology and explained what went wrong and why and what we were doing to try and ensure it doesn't happen again. But where it was necessary to make a recompense or put something right for that customer, and that was upheld through the actual investigation into the complaint they raised, we've by all means done that. In some instances, we've taken the opportunity to speak directly to the individual and not just leave it to email, excuse me. I've got the 100-day cough. So we are making those remedies, recompense where necessary. I know sometimes an apology, especially if they've taken the time and trouble to make a complaint and then basically been ignored because they haven't heard from us and had to chase either through the counsellors, another advocate, or just by coming and telling us they haven't had a response. That is not a good enough service, and we've owned up to that and we've explained it to the customer. Where those cases have then reached the LGSCO because the customer was still not satisfied, which is absolutely their right and remit to do. Obviously, the LGSCO has made their determination. There may still be some that come through in this next reporting cycle because this was 23 to 24, and the majority of the outcomes of those were that we'd already put the remedy in place before it had come. There was nothing else for the Ombudsman to find us or take us actions to do. So yes, it was not a good enough service. Lessons have been learned. I've also shared within ICT where they may be able to look at the lessons I've learned from that transition period and transfer into other case management systems going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. I just got a question, and then depending on what the answer to the question is, there might be a follow-up. It picks up on Councillor Melly's question around the new management system. It was really just a question about the resourcing of the team and the service, because obviously if it's a very narrow channel through which people can make complaints, then it's obviously the numbers would go down. So it was just whether you could just clarify whether there'd been any changes in the overall resourcing of the service, just in terms of them being able to assess that performance in a more comparative way to previous years. So if there was any changes, if you could just clarify just that in a wider resourcing sense, rather than obviously you're working with a different system, but just in a general resourcing state, and then I might have another comment if that's okay, Chair.
So within the what is currently called the corporate governance team, there's two separate distinct areas. There's the complaints and feedback, so that's your adults, children's and your corporate complaints, comments, etc. And then within the information governance side, that's all your FOIs, EIRs, covert, records management, all that other stuff. And within the complaint side, there is a 2.5 full-time equivalent, what's called complaints advisors, and they do the log in the initial assessments, the initial investigations. They will do some of the escalated and complex investigations because it has to be an investigation independent and impartial to the service area being complained or commented about. There is also the ability where we must provide the independent investigator and or independent person the ability to use the contracted service through Choices and Voices Care Limited as the current contractor, and they do some of the investigations, so there is always that resource capacity there to do that, but that obviously comes at an hourly rate and charge. And as you'll see from the report, where figures for that annual cost has gone back up to what it was 2 years ago. That may very well increase given the number and potential increase in children's social care complaints. Within the team, we have been, within the complaints side, we have been, we had a 0.5, so we had a half-time vacancy, which through the council-wide processes, we did not fill. And as part of the work that was gone into the last budget round savings and proposals, I think it was February this year, that post and cost saving was offered up and agreed as a saving going forward. So a part of that team that is going into customer services, it is just now 2.5 full-time equivalents.
Thank you. So actually, there is slightly less resource, I guess, is what you're saying in that team than there was before. But is there any evidence that has prevented people from being able to make any complaints? And then I'll just come back on anything else.
No, because all our channels are still continue to be open. Website, through advocates, through service areas, pointing people into the direction of the complaints team. All those channels and methods and contact channels are still all open. What it may do, it hasn't really been reflected so much in this year's annual report, but the next annual report may very well show more out of time responses, just because the nature and complexity of complaints does seem to get increased year on year, and with until the work's done to understand where else we can get the opportunities and the benefits from moving to a bigger team like customer services, there will be savings, efficiency and effectivenesses that we can identify from that work, and moving into that service area, that hopefully that half post saving can be mitigated against quite quickly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just very briefly then. So it feels like there is slightly more constraint in the team, which is probably costing the timeliness of the way in which some people are receiving their response. But actually, the thing that struck me in the report was actually the really strong, particularly children's services and the compliments that were coming in for that team, struck me as a real kind of strength and a real asset, really, just in terms of the wider challenges that the local authority are facing around the budgets, to still be in a position to be receiving that level of positive feedback from service users feels really positive. So I just, my only other point, Chair, if it's okay, was just to ask what is done in terms of that dissemination of some of that. They read, when you read them as a big long list, they read really positively. I'm sure that individually when they come in, they go out to teams, but there is something about the list as a whole and how positive it makes you feel. And I'm sure it would make staff feel about their role working for the local authority at a time when everyone knows that, you know, staff have been under an awful lot of pressure. So it was just really whether or not there's anything else that can be done to kind of celebrate all the good things that people are doing when we know that things are really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And again, one of the things that I've tried to emphasise in the report this year is the training that we've been doing. And obviously looking at, as part of that training, the 4 C's, being including the compliments and making sure that we emphasise that with the staff teams and making sure that they understand how important it is for lots and lots of different reasons, so that we can all, you can all understand that, so that they are aware of it for themselves, so that the public can see that as well, and have that balanced picture of what's going on. But also in kind of doing some of that training, some of the discussions are around making sure that when you are sending that through to us as the complaints team, so that it can go into the reports, that we're making sure that the people who are receiving, who that compliment is for, receive that in a really timely way, because that can make a huge difference to them on that day. So that's a big part of the training, actually.
Yeah, thank you. Just in terms of how the complaints and compliments come in, obviously I'm aware of the Have Your Say mailbox, and I tend to direct people to that if they want to pursue an issue. In terms of the varying kind of angles through which the team has to deal with complaints and receive compliments, what kind of proportion come in via that route and what proportion come in via other routes?
By far the majority through the Have Your Say email box. We still get a number that come in by telephone. We get very, very few that come in by post now. But what we also do as well is we'll make sure that staff are aware of how they may need to pass those on to us and when they need to pass those on when they're dealing with something.
Yeah.
Again, that's part of the training. And we are also very, you know, if we receive something and we need to speak to somebody, we're happy to meet with people, we're happy to go and see people. So to try and make it as accessible as we possibly can.
Yeah, that's good. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, just a quick supplementary on that. You didn't mention social media, but I imagine that there are ongoing compliments, comments, complaints, both in terms of replies to posts, but also people presumably private messages sometimes and so on. Is there data from that? Is that different?
So what we get is the team and comms and media team, if they get a message into the social media, we don't manage or monitor that ourselves, but we get that through from the comms and media team if they, same for FOIs, etc. If they come in on any format, on any channel, it's for us to recognise that it's a complaint or a concern or compliment, etc., and send it through the right process. So that's where the staff training becomes really important, that they know to take it and where to send it on. But yes, all those channels. We've got an online form as well. MPs, yourselves as councillors will contact us as well on different methods. So yeah, all those channels are open.
Just, I guess, just to check one thing on there, that if there's an action, then it'll get fed through to the right team, presumably. But if there's no action, for example, someone says, amazing work, really happy with the council, that won't actually end up in our compliments list, right?
It may not always end up in the annual complaints report on all things compliments, etc. But what we are very keen to encourage all service areas to do is don't forget, everybody seems to know how to log and manage and send on a complaint, but it doesn't seem to happen as regularly as we'd like as compliments, because it is a great story, it is a celebration, it is about using that information to inform staff meetings, letting them know that, you know, whilst we may come and be doing an investigation under the complaints, here's also the compliments that you're receiving. So yeah, absolutely, it's an encouragement to make sure that service areas, please tell us when you get your compliments as well.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. It was touched on a bit from three comments we've had previously. So I think I wanted to reflect on that. Your team has always been very good. Maybe it's in the name is in the title about information governance, and often we ask questions and we get emails back saying this is being treated as a freedom of information request because you've accurately logged it. And the same with complaints. Sometimes people just make a comment and that comment goes in, and then we get feedback as councillors saying, okay, we've logged this as a complaint. That's what your team is expert at, and as has been said, you're rolling that training out. I think some of that fluctuation in numbers will always depend on the vast majority of things that come in won't come into your team, and it's that the conversations we had, those channels that feed in, be that social media, be that the customer centre, be that individual social workers, be that individual workers out on the street, and it's how good they are. That's where you will see sort of large fluctuations. When people are very good and your training is working fantastically well, then the person who gets stopped in the street and says that's a rubbish pothole being filled will log that as a complaint and say, okay, I'll do that. Other people won't. So that's why you'll see the fluctuation. But sort of led me on to how I wanted to end on a positive. It's the same sort of thing that Councillor Rose was saying. How do we get those compliments and also the successes in dealing with complaints to those individual members of staff? So I think, as you said, your team's going to move into customer services, which might help some of this. But I suspect our frontline staff don't spend a lot of time reading corporate scrutiny reports or perhaps reading this particular report. And we've had so many issues with customer service staff, especially, who take a hell of a lot of unnecessary abuse day in, day out, just simply trying to do their job from people who are frustrated and irate, etc. How do we make sure that we're getting back to them? You know what, you're doing a brilliant job in terms of dealing with those customers, getting that through. Where complaints are legitimate, they're being dealt with properly, and those customers are getting the help back. And where they are not legitimate, they're getting that, because in many ways, actually seeing, if you're a customer service manager, seeing that 80% of complaints aren't upheld, for example, helps you feel a little bit better about what you're doing day to day, that actually sometimes I am dealing with people who have unreasonable expectations and that emboldens you to be able to do your job a little bit better. So it's just how you get it back out to all the staff that they're doing such a good job.
So again, with the unlimited resource capacity of my role and being able to get around more, I would always love to do more. There is moves and plans to put more in the all staff comms that goes out on a weekly basis. To add to the council has an internal high five. It's looking at how do we do the compliment raising and the awareness of that. 'Cause you're absolutely right. How many members of staff would read a scrutiny report to see the compliments? I do a report regular now to CMT, and hopefully the directors and the corporate directors are taking those positive messages away to their teams and sharing with their service areas. The other thing on that is not as well as the training and the awareness sessions that Kath and the advisors deliver on most of the occasions, is we are invited as a regular standing item on a lot of directorate management teams, senior management teams, and or team sessions, just team meetings. We would like to be at more so that we can do that sharing and celebrating where we're doing a good job, putting the wider picture to there. So yes, you're absolutely right, Councillor Eyre, where you're dealing with customers on a day-to-day basis and maybe facing abuse offence or threats, etc., to understand that there is a high level of complaints after an investigation being not upheld, and you are doing, and or where there might have been something that gone wrong, that we can share and learn from each other and different service areas experiences. Absolutely. We would love to do more of those. We are taking advantage, like I say, of the all staff comms, etc., to push those messages out a little bit more, and a little bit more of staff friendly sessions, and also encouraging all managers across the piece to invite us not just to the performance reporting cycle, not just for the training, but to come and be a standing item just on your usual team session, so that we can share the different news and certainly celebrate the successes.
Thank you very much. So I'm not seeing any more hands. Thank you, Kath. Thank you, Lorraine, for bringing the report. And just to echo what others have said, I think it's really good that the examples of good service and praise are highlighted in the report, because I think we certainly as councillors, we only tend to get complaints. Although, to be fair, quite often residents will say, I've just seen someone either cut the grass or do something that did a really good job, can you please pass it on? And I always think, who should I pass it on to? Well, see, I didn't know that, so I kind of guess who the responsible head of service is and send it to them. But in future, I shall know to send it to you, and I kind of send it in and hope it reaches the staff on the front line.
We do also make sure that if a member of staff is particularly mentioned, etc., that gets fed back to that particular member of staff as well. Yep. We also do, which we don't do many now, maybe 1, 2 every couple of years. The other thing that the complaints part of the service do, and don't forget, and we can send this round, there is also, apart from the high fives, etc., within the council processes, there is the ability to do staff commendations. And that goes on individuals' personnel files. It's got a strict process on how we do it and how we assess those. But I can send that round as well. It's not just compliments, but where you get those things that you feel there is a staff commendation to be made, that comes through our team as well. So please take that forward if you can.
Councillor Rose?
Yeah, can we take that away as a formal action, since all groups are represented here, to talk to our own groups about doing that more? Because I was just thinking, actually, I had things this week where someone emailed in with an issue, it got fixed really quick, and they emailed, thank you very much, great work to see it done so speedily. I didn't forward that on. I should be doing staff commendations more, and I'm sure other people are in the same boat. So as well as forwarding that on to us, if we take that action to talk more about it internally, that'd be great.
Sorry, I'm getting in trouble from Richard, sorry. And if anybody, want me or Kath to come to any of your group leader meetings to share and look at that in a bit more detail, more than happy to.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening. So we now move to agenda item 6, for which Helen will be joining us at the table. There should be a nameplate for you there somewhere, Helen. Helen is going to talk to us about the workforce strategy, workforce performance update report. So this was born, I think, from I suppose a recognition with the new council plan. We were really wanting to understand how that had informed workforce development in terms of setting the strategy to ensure that there is a workforce that's set up to deliver the aims set out in the council plan. Helen's produced a report setting out how that's being tackled, and what we're asked to do as a committee is to note the strategy's structure and aims, and to note the performance and the measures of success that are contained within that. So over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this report generally gives you a bit of an overview and a bit of a framework. So we have a workforce strategy, which essentially talks about how we're going to equip, exactly how you said there, Chair, how we're going to equip our workforce to be able to deliver for the future, both for the workforce plan, the council plan, but within the arena that we've got at the moment in terms of financial challenges, etc. And you'll have seen from paragraph 7, I've set out some of the key themes that we actually look at. So leadership and management, resourcing for a stronger foundation, resilience and wellbeing, equality, diversity, inclusion. So within all of those, there's an awful lot of activity, and that's monitored by corporate management team on a quarterly basis. And all of these themes get driven down as well. And I will comment on a little bit of what Lorraine's just said, which is really quite nice, without me saying about what are the key things in terms of leadership and management is about celebrating success. And celebrating success includes compliments as well, and driving that down. And it was nice to see that Lorraine just trotted that off the tongue, and that's brilliant because we all know that we've got that ability, and it's really strong in terms of leadership to be able to say we are complimenting our teams, we are delivering successes, etc. So under leadership and management, we've had the recent corporate management team restructure. We are about to launch on our phase 2. So the corporate management team restructure looked at all of those officers who report into the chief operating officer. Phase 2 looked at our next level down, and we were looking at making sure that we were aligning services, making sure we're efficient, etc. So a big part of leadership is making sure that our services are efficient there. We've done a big program called Let's Talk Leadership in terms of engagement, and it isn't a case of it's a one-stop wonder. It's embedding right across the board, because one of the ethoses we're getting is that everybody's a leader. So that's a key part of our strategy, that everybody's a leader of the aspects that they can deal with. Equipping, making sure our managers are available. Manager program there. We're investing in training, because obviously if we don't invest in our managers, they can't deliver to their best. Our Leading Together team, which is our corporate leads for and heads of service, we'll make sure that they meet on a regular basis, program, etc. available for them. We've talked about PDRs, and we've reinforced those, performance development reviews. We've done a number of different platforms in terms of communication. We have 3 key messages, our key 3, all right? Key 3, and we've also included with a lot of the leadership and management, there's an overlap of the performance improvement plan, which you've seen here at the last meeting. And there was things on there like buddying, etc. So there's a wide range of things that come under the leadership and management, and it's not a one-stop shop. This is very much a dynamic action plan. Under resourcing for a stronger foundation, you can imagine there that recruitment, succession planning, the reward structures, the rewarding of success, our apprentices, we've got a strong apprenticeship field, and continue to make sure that we've got a resilient workforce as well. And that's a lot around communication. It's about leadership, it's about health, etc., which also leads into resilience and well-being, health and safety campaigns, risk assessments, lone working, absence management, promotion of well-being. Both financial well-being and physical well-being is always important to touch on. And we monitor all of this, and I've put into paragraph 8 some of the direct measures of success that we look at. And a big one of those is the employee survey, which we're preparing for very shortly again. You know, from previous meetings and a lot of the work we do around equality and diversity, it's incredibly important to us. Linked into the workforce strategy, there's numerous different levels of actions, including the recruitment and selection guidance. We've been looking an awful lot at the neurodiversity awareness, making sure that our managers are aware of that. Staff networks are really very strong. Equality profiling is something that we've been looking at. Human rights training. And we've extended our pay gap, which isn't just to include gender anymore, it also includes ethnic pay gap as well. And one thing recently we've done is a staff suggestions hub, and that's been really quite successful, and it's quite nice to have that direct engagement. And what is nice is that you get it from every level of the organisation, and again, that's based on our some new platforms that we're using in terms of comms. So that's very much how we engage and make sure that we're delivering, but it's also making sure that managers cascade that down. One thing that Lorraine mentioned just a moment ago was about how those things get cascaded. It very much goes to corporate management team. We've then got key 3 messages. We've got a weekly comms message that goes out. There's DMTs. We work very closely with trade unions as well. So it's a full circle of these communications. It's not once, it's numerous times. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour, Chair. And happy to take
Thank
any
you very
questions.
much. So, any comments, observations, questions, Councillor Whitcroft?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for this report. Very interesting. And in particular, I'm interested with the council employee sort of feedback hub, was it? Where, employees of the council can give back levels. Good to hear that it's coming from all levels of the organisation. Are there any examples of suggestions that have come from council staff that have been implemented or changed? Any sort of prime examples you can think of? And if possible, could you just explain what the process would be, how that sort of mailbox is managed and how it's implemented?
To be fair, quite a lot of them come in anonymous,
Okay.
so we don't actually know. But what we've very much done is saying, if you've got a suggestion, talk to your manager, and if you can implement it, implement it. And I think that's been one of the big voices that we've actually given. So I can collate and give you some I haven't got the examples,
Sure.
but I can certainly collate some examples and take it forward. We received in the first month that it was launched 94 suggestions. There were some duplicate suggestions in there. One of the things that came in quite loud from a HR perspective was about buying additional annual leave, and it's something that we will explore. It's not something we've implemented, but it's something we will explore and things like that. So there is voice there, and we do go back to people by putting FAQs out. So we say, we've had this suggestion, rather than back to an individual if they don't put the name on. We've had this, we're going to talk about this. Another suggestion is about electronic leave cards, things like that. So there's all responses around that. ICT, there's been some good ICT examples that have come in that I've overseen on those. They've been quite positive. Simple suggestions of, can we please have a bench for wellbeing in terms of up at Hazel Court? That's been implemented, and that was actually supported by a staff lottery. So there's lots of discussion around that, so we make sure it goes out. Clarification, someone asked for a bit of clarity on some policies. That's been really useful as well. So yeah, suggestions don't have to necessarily be big. There was quite a few that came in terms of finance as well. So everything from tourist levies and things like that to, we had one about moorings as well, pay for moorings on the river. So it's come up with lots of different ideas, which is great. So, and we've said where that can't happen or where it can happen, or yes, just go with it, which has been really good. And they're continuing. It's not been a one-hit wonder. They're still coming through. It's been good.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Just a question on the table of measures of success. The bottom, more employees choose to disclose if they have a disability or identification of ethnicity. Have you also broadened that to include sexual orientation, gender identity? Are they just examples, but there's more to it than that?
Yes, absolutely. We're encouraging everyone to do their protected characteristics effectively. But because we do ethnicity pay gap now, and it's something that we're wanting to do with disability at a later date. We're telling them the reasons why we're wanting to collect that data and why it's positive, and also engaging with the staff networks to understand why people don't necessarily want to as well. So, and understand, and some people just simply don't want to,
Yeah.
but it's not mandatory.
Is that a supplementary, Councillor Rose? Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick supplementary. It's increasingly common in the industry to go beyond the protected characteristics to ask things like a level of education, level of parents' education, more social aspects as well. So is it just the list of kind of equality aspects, or is there more to it?
We're not doing what you've just suggested there. We're not taking it further than the protected characteristics at this point in time. So.
Thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of questions on slightly different themes. So if you're okay for me to ask both, then I'll do. So the first question was just really this report and this theme is something that this committee's had over a number of years. We've had this sort of workforce development strategy, and I was trying to remember what the four themes were of the previous strategies, and they may have changed in some of their wording, but I'm sure that the sort of general themes of them are quite similar in a way. And so I wanted to just kind of better understand how the LGA Peer Challenge had sort of directly impacted and changed this strategy versus the previous strategies that we've had that have, as I say, probably in some sense broadly had the similar themes running throughout them.
In short, Councillor Crawshaw, it didn't. But there was already themes that we were dealing with that then matched the corporate improvement plan. So therefore there was a linkage between them. So we were already dealing with the leadership and management and training for managers. That came up at the corporate peer challenge. So there's a crossover with the workforce plan. So that's there. There was buddying system that was already in track that actually came up as part of, but it wasn't presented to the peers, hence why it's gone into the workforce strategy. There's things in the equality framework that's been picked out on recruitment and selection. So there's bits being transferred here. We've just made sure that it's actually highlighted, so there's a cross-reference there.
Okay, I'm going to just supplement on that if I may, because I'm actually a bit surprised that you're saying it didn't, because it says in the report that it's developed workforce development strategy is designed to directly address the recommendations of the LGA Peer Challenge. So there may be some things that we were ongoing, but I can't imagine that everything that we were doing prior to the Peer Challenge was anticipated,
Okay,
or the Peer Challenge. So it's trying to pick out how we've shaped and changed this based on
the themes that came out of the peer challenge. There was things around leadership and management. So there was things about the corporate management team structure. Corporate management team structure, there was elements that we extended on that in terms of recommendations, the governance review, etc. We would do that. It was put into the workforce strategy. It's also in the peer challenge there. So there's some crossovers and things there, but overall, we were already doing the corporate management team structure before the peers came in. That's just by example.
I think if I may just supplementary, if that's okay. I mean, just taking, for example, the first one of them around promoting a positive and productive culture, which is, I know, something that I challenged you on quite a few times from the chair in terms of that, and I think is also something that came up specifically within the LGA peer challenge. So there must presumably have been things about the approach previously that wasn't addressing some of the issues that then the peer challenge
it's about
brought up.
redefining them, I think.
So it's just wanting to understand that it's been fully taken on board and adapted, which, as I say, the report says it has, and then your first answer says it hasn't. And I'm kind of, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I do want to understand that we are fully understanding what was brought up in the peer challenge and have then adapted this policy or this process to fully address that as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't got a copy of the peer challenge action plan. That's actually coming forward to the leaders session on the 20th. So you'll be able to see the details there, and you'll see that there's some crossovers there. But realistically, yes, there is elements there. The buddying system was one of the things that's been forwarded into the workforce strategy. There was more communication on financial strategy that came up as part of the peer challenge. That's been weaved into here as part of the leadership and management in terms of the finance understanding for new managers that comes in. So that's been weaved into both the peer challenge and into the workforce strategy that's there. I'm trying to think of some other ones. In terms of the culture, we've done a lot of things around governance. The culture also talks about communication, so hence why we've done and the key 3 messages. That was in track, but it came from the peer challenge, and it's also weaved into the workforce strategy. So there's elements there that are a lot of crossovers.
And are you okay for me to pick up my second point? So the other one, and this will speak to something that we'll get to later on in the agenda as well. So there's a mention about the equality, diversity, inclusion and training around that. There's no mention at all about taking a trauma-informed approach, and that was something that went through council as a full council motion, that we as a council should seek to ensure that we're taking a trauma-informed approach across the whole council. And actually that motion isn't in the list of motions previously, which I was looking for to try and refer to the specific outcomes. So we'll come to that. But has that reached you in terms of workforce development, and can you speak at all to how we're seeking to address that, or if it hasn't? Are you able to take that as an action, because I think it should be referenced in here?
It's ongoing. It's in the corporate improvement plan to be trauma informed. There's been some initial work, and there's some work ongoing to kind of like look at the different levels of trauma informed training that's actually required. There is an e-learning package it's either developed or in development. It's not being led by HR. HR are facilitating it, so it's being led by colleagues. So that's in there. It is in the action plan. I can't remember whether it's in the workforce strategy, to be honest, the workforce plan, but it would draw in under a lot of the banners of making sure that our workforce is resilient and making sure that they're informed. But I can take that back as an action point to have a look and get back to you.
That'd be great if you could. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, also thanks for the report. I've got 2 questions. One's largely a follow-up to Johnny's. The survey, or the employee survey that's done, is that got suitable questions in about the the culture within the organisation that gives us good indications that we're getting things right or not?
It has indeed, and it also has the excuse me, it also has the ability to have some free text. So yes, it does.
Yeah.
We're due to do that again early. We'll be starting to formulate that anytime now, and we'll be doing it in the new year.
Okay, thank you. Second question on the resourcing for a strong foundation. Obviously, recruitment and retention is the very much core of that. You've got measures of success in terms of employee turnover, which picks up the retention to a good degree. But on the recruitment, other than the specific one on apprenticeships, you've got nothing about how successful we are in recruiting for vacant positions. Do we manage to fill all the vacancies first time? Are we having to re-advertise significantly in particular areas? Those sorts of indicators of whether we're adequate, doing all right on the recruitment front.
It's peaks and troughs, in all honesty. I haven't got that data. We're not collecting all that data. We do have it on an individual basis. We, exactly the same as many other local authorities, we are struggling with some of the areas. Some areas are naturally high turnover, and that's what you would expect. I would expect customer service assistants and business support to actually be quite high turnover, because it's an introduction to the council, and we often get a lot of people that are actually promoted from there to be internal. Yes, it's a good measure of success. We could look at that, but we try different options. We aren't suffering, I would say, at this point on any particular areas. Social work has actually been quite successful. We've done an awful lot of different work for social workers, without a doubt. Some of our planning, we've had some market supplements, so we've done some strategies around. We're preempting the market where we know we're going to get some difficulties. So we work very carefully as part of making sure that vacancies go out to be successful.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I don't share Councillor Crawshaw's surprise that an LGA review didn't tell us things that we already know, because I've been through many and it generally is just paying to be told what we already know. But I think my general reflection on this is I find it very difficult to get any assurance, and actually the questions that Councillor Merritt asked got far more interesting responses than is actually within the report. In reality, all that's in the report is paragraph 8. There's background before paragraph 8, and then there's a boilerplate after paragraph 8. But all of this hinges just on paragraph 8. I'm guessing they're not all the measures of success. And while I'm all for brief papers and keeping things particularly short, we should have had the background papers. We should have had some of these statistics. We should have had some of this knowledge. In essence, what we've got is just a very short table of about 25 words, which just says everything's fine, which it may well be. And everything may well be fine, but this is a scrutiny committee and our job is to look into that. And there's nothing in this paper that we can actually look at. I mean, agency spend, for example, there's a reduction in agency spend. That's great from a financial perspective, and Debbie will be very happy in terms of what the impact is on the budget. We don't know what that impact is on adult social care, children's social care, all the different areas. We heard previously about vacancies being held in customers, which is impacting on customers. So there are backgrounds to all of these different measures that are either positive or negative. And I think if this report is ever going to come back, we do at least need the background papers, because in reality, there's not an awful lot this committee can do with paragraph 8.
Paragraph 8 was just given you as a very high level, to be honest, because the workforce strategy is actually the head of paid service, and it's not particularly for scrutiny. So I would take it, that's why I gave you a very high level. The head of paid service actually looks at all the monitoring side that comes under the workforce rather than the scrutiny.
I mean, I think I entirely take the point that it's not for this committee or others to to make decisions on what the workforce strategy should be. I think there's, and I don't know what other background papers would help in terms of giving us more information and more assurance that some of the things that have been mentioned in terms of either policies that council has agreed are properly and adequately reflected in the workforce strategy. I've no reason to suspect that they're not, but it's I don't know whether going forward, if there were background papers, which whilst you might not, there may be good reason for them not to be published, could potentially be shared with committee members. But it's hard to speculate without knowing what it is that might otherwise exist that that we would find it useful to have a sort of a better understanding of a workforce strategy that is delivering some good work. And you mentioned the staff feedback, and that's all really positive stuff that member staff are engaging with. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. But it's just a follow on really from what yourself and Councillor have said. I mean, in the table that we've got, there are a couple of comments that say steady and comparable, which is encouraging, but do we know? There's no benchmark, and I kind of get what Councillor is saying, and I appreciate the Chair's comment that this isn't per se for us to say whether it's right or it's wrong, but I just when you've got just simple statements like steady and comparable, what is steady and comparable? What is it comparable to? Is it comparable to something from last year, from years before? What's the national average? It just needs to be something more for it to be hung on for us to say where we can see that it's not that we don't doubt anything that you're saying, but
Steady and comparable to last year. That's what I was meaning them to be. Steady and comparable to last year.
We don't know what last year was.
Yes, yeah, I appreciate that.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I read that as steady and comparable to other comparable authorities, which obviously it wasn't. Yeah, I suppose if you can reflect on some of that feedback in terms of the sort of thirst for information and knowledge that exists within the committee, which is is good. We ask for reports, and it's only I suppose the lesson for us is to, or for me, to be more specific in terms of what our expectations are as a committee, because I've sat in a few committees where, well, this is not what we expected. Well, maybe if we'd specified in advance in slightly more explicit detail what we were expecting, then yeah, you're not having to second guess what it is you think we're after. So that's something that I'll take away. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I guess if we can be more specific, I totally agree with the points that have just been made, that I haven't had any comments on this paper because there's not much to comment on in terms of what's been achieved. It's more about here's what's in the strategy, which isn't really an update. If we're able to get 3 years of trend data or something more, than this is basically an up, right or down arrow, right? It would be useful to have more detail. And just speaking for myself, having seen these numbers for lots of organisations at a mid-level, having seen these numbers for the hospital as a governor of the hospital, and having seen a lot of these measurements in other committees in the council, I don't think there's anything in here that would be too sensitive for us to look at as a gut feeling. So I think if it can be reviewed for the next time this report comes to us for the next update, I think it would be useful to see more.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Helen, for the update and for answering our many varied questions. And I'm sure we'll see you again. Thank you. Members, I propose we take a 5-minute break and resume just before 5 to 7 for the next item, which is budget scrutiny. Yes, I know that's 7 minutes, but history tells me I say 5 and it'll be 7 anyway. Right, welcome back, everybody. So we are at agenda item 7, which is discussion on budget scrutiny. So at the last meeting, we had a discussion and Debbie came to talk to us about the proposals for sort of the continued development and engagement on budget proposals. This is the next phase in that, which is sharing some I think they're both as early ideas proposals. So if we can treat them as such and have a hopefully constructive discussion, I think we have to be realistic about what we can achieve in the time that we'll have available. To my mind, I see this as an opportunity for us to consider some of the ideas that are being put forward, to raise sort of questions to help us understand what is being proposed and what the potential, what it would look like from a resident's perspective. That's how I've kind of read these. So if we can, we'll all have other opportunities to scrutinise detailed proposals in due course. But I welcome the opportunity to have this discussion this evening and hope we can make good use of the time and provide feedback to the executive member, Councillor Lomas, who isn't here in person but is here virtually. And obviously she'll have the ability to raise her virtual hand and chip in as and when, and Debbie as well to give us some context. So Debbie, would you like to introduce the report, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. So a couple of things just to point out. First of all, they are obvious, but I'll say them anyway, is first of all, the medium-term financial strategy assumptions set out in the report are just assumptions. They're not facts. Everything can and probably will change. So they are just planning assumptions. And the second thing is, as you've mentioned, Chair, these are only proposals and no decisions made until as executive recommends a budget to full council, and then budget council makes that final decision and sets council tax in February. So as she said, they are proposals, suggestions, ideas for consultation. We've not really done it this way before, and I've not come to scrutiny before on a scrutiny of the budget. So I'm sort of making this up as I go along. So any feedback as to what you expected and isn't included would be welcome. So what I've done is I've reminded you of the consultation process. So we are about to embark on stage 3. And I've included in the report a link to the stage 1 outcomes, and also the stage 2, the conversation that we had with some residents and partners. I've included links to where that information is held if you wanted more detail. I've set out the council's medium-term financial strategy that identified the £30 million budget gap, and I've set out some of the assumptions that we've used. We have used actually some slightly higher assumptions for contract inflation on adult social care, but I don't think they're high enough in light of the Chancellor's budget the other week. And then I've just outlined in paragraph 11 the kind of approach to closing the budget gap, to sort of just give you some context really. And then in terms of balancing the budget, I've just outlined how one of the things we said we'd do would be an ongoing review of the assumptions in the MTFS, and that is something we're doing all the time. So in sort of paragraphs 12, 13 and 14, I've just set out some of the proposed changes in assumptions, you know, following the inflation reducing, interest rates reducing. It does mean we can tweak some of our assumptions. That was before the Chancellor's budget announcement, but we'll come to that. And so we've removed some growth from the medium-term financial strategy because we think we can manage without it. And I have now assumed a higher council tax increase throughout the 3 years of the strategy. And I would just say they are reasonable assumptions, but they're not without risk because they could be wrong. And if they are wrong, then there will be a bigger budget gap. So this is more of an art than a science really, is these are assumptions, or working assumptions. They might be right, they might be wrong. So it's not without risk to do this, but I think it's a reasonable approach. And then I've set out the key areas where we've been looking at where we can identify savings to fill the gap. Those of you with a calculator will notice that it doesn't quite close the gap. So we are still putting proposals to executive for them to look at what other alternatives there might be. So there'll be more proposals to come because the budget's not quite balanced. And then just to
briefly talk about the Chancellor's budget, which it doesn't really impact on the medium-term financial strategy as such, other than some of the announcements made do increase our costs. So the employers' national insurance contributions, we should get a grant to cover the cost of our direct staff. But again, as you all know, we have a lot of contracts in social care and other areas. We will not get compensated for those increasing costs. So those contractors will have that increase in cost. They will pass that on to us. We don't get compensated for that. And so there are also some other phrases that were mentioned in the budget. And again, you should probably know, we really need to await our detailed individual settlement, the draft local government settlement in December, which usually comes that week of the 16th of December. That's when we'll really know what the impact, we won't really know the impact until we get that. So this is all estimates. There was talk in the Chancellor's budget around reforming local authority funding. Again, those of you that have been around for a while, that is not an unfamiliar phrase to you in Chancellor's budget announcements. But there is talk about they might reflect some changes in 25-26. That's both an opportunity and a risk for us, quite honestly. We are, as you all know, one of the lowest funded councils in the country, but if they do it on deprivation, we won't score as highly. And so, like I say, there's potential for all this to change. I'm probably not really helping you, am I? But anyway, there is potential for all this to change. And there is the prospect of a spending review in the spring, which will get more detail, more analysis. So we've got a lot more information from the government. We're expecting a local government finance policy statement sometime this month. I don't know when, but in November. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, that will give us a little bit more detail, but it will be that December settlement that will give us the final information. And then finally, what I've just added at Annex 1 is, it's not the final version because there have been a few tweaks to this, but at the time of writing the report and the publication, this was the working draft of the proposed consultation that will go out to residents, everybody and anybody. There will be some workshops as well, but it was just to sort of, again, happy to take views, take feedback as to whether you think this will elicit helpful responses, whether you think there are different ways we could do it. So I'll probably stop talking there. Is that?
Yeah.
That sound reasonable?
No, that's it's fine to good to set out the known unknowns. What I was proposing to do was to use Annex 1 as a way in which to kind of try and structure the discussion and gather the feedback. Obviously, Annex 1 is the sort of the draft question, so we can members can feedback on the way in which questions are kind of pitched, and also comment or ask questions about some of the proposed measures. So hopefully we can do two things at the same time. I've got lots of hands, but I'm not sure whether there's kind of general questions or specific. Hopefully we'll cover the questions you want to raise as we go through, and I'll say Section 1, understanding the budget challenge. So if your question is about Section 1, understanding the budget challenge, and the two questions that are featured there, we will cover those off. Are people happy with that? I don't want to constrain your ability to say things you want to say, but otherwise it will be completely random and we'll be all over the place. Okay, right. Section 1 of Annex 1, understanding the budget challenge. So there are two there are two questions there. So I would invite questions on phraseology. Are there other things other questions we should be asking, or information we should be providing? So I've got councillors Eyre, Rose, Coles, Melly, and Merritt. Excellent. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I think the easy bit is question 2 there. It seems to be like one of the most pointless questions I've ever seen in being asked. Is basically, here's everything that we can do. Do you think we should try and do it? It pretty much covers everything. So I would just delete that entire question unless you're going to ask each of them individually. For example, do you believe that we should raise money? Yes. But just say raise money, cut costs, do things differently. That's pretty much everything we can do. So it's not really adding anything. No one's going to say no, so we should be doing a bit of everything probably. But my wider point on that one was, as you said, and you've sort of superseded that a little bit, the preceding paragraphs that aren't under section 1, but is covered in section 1, do update the MTFS quite significantly. I would say in the region of £6 to £7 million update in the MTF. So it doesn't seem to make sense that you update the MTFS, reduce the budget gap to about 23, 24 million, and then include a question that asks about 30 million, which is wrong. So that probably needs to reflect the 23, 24 figure rather than 30 figure. Caveating that with, you've now said, following the government announcement, that may tweak it a little bit, but your best starting point is probably the 23, 24 that you've put in this particular paper, and shoehorning one in off that point in terms of the government changes. One of those that was mentioned was council tax flexibility, and that's not in the consultation. So you probably, it's not clear what council tax flexibility means, but it can only mean a certain amount of things. So if the government is going to announce greater council tax flexibility, it would be good to have it in the consultation question. Do you agree with lifting the cap to 7-8%? Do you agree with getting rid of single occupancy discount, et cetera, et cetera? Because that's probably what council tax flexibility means. And if we haven't asked it, we don't know the answer.
So just to say, that, so I think that, and I haven't drilled down through all the stuff in open data, but that was one of the themes in the big budget conversation in terms of some questions around council tax. I don't know whether that's already been kind of teased out, and
certainly didn't mention single person occupancy going, if that was to be one of the options that councils were given.
Do you want me to gather all comments and then you come back, and obviously Councillor Lomas can raise her hand if she wants to come back rather than you have to? Is that okay? Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, there are comments and questions on the report rather than the annex, which is why I was trying to work out where to ask them. But
I'm sure you can manage to weave them in.
Well, I've got questions about the specific things later on, but I guess firstly, to answer your question, I think actually you did explain it really well, and I think in this report you've explained it really well. It's good to have a lot of that understanding of how we get to where we get to in the public eye early, and it's great that you're at Scrutiny, and I think actually there's not much I'd improve in how you presented it to us. It's just very hard to give any understanding at this point in time. The one thing I did want to ask up front is, in table 15 where you set out the summary of the remaining proposals, and then in Annex 1, we've got these individual numbers. They're not the same sets of lines and numbers, but some things could be squeezed into it with, contract management could include some things that are separate. Are they the same contents, or are they different points in time, or what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, they're sort of two different things in that this is how we could balance the budget, I suppose, is what this is saying. Here are some options as to how we could balance the budget. And then the consultation is obviously worded in a certain way because it needs to be at an understandable, I can't remember what the phrase is, but you have it at like a certain reading level, don't you, so that it's understandable. And trying to ask questions in as open a way as possible to get as much out of it as we can, because we're not going to be doing this every 5 minutes. So it's just trying to get as much as we can out of the consultation. So, and there are some things where you might not want to do it as either as an administration or as a council, budget council, you might not want to do it, but we can still ask a question about it. We can still get views about it. And so it's just trying to ask as many questions as possible that we think we can get some views on. So they're not kind of supposed to be the same thing. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Okay. No, thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that first section, I think the question I guess I have, and I fully understand, Debbie, the point you're making about, there are limited amounts of questions that you can ask in a survey, and there's also you've got to be mindful of the kind of tone and language because it's a public survey. I suppose my question was about people understanding it says £30 million budget deficit. I'm not sure that is particularly clear, just in terms of what that actually means. So I don't know whether it's possible. My understanding was that we've had for example, the increasing demand in adult social care, what that means in terms of additional demand on those services. So 7.5 million overspend in 21-22, or 3.53 million overspend in 22-23. I don't know where we're at this year in terms of that demand. That I assume we're still in a place of increasing demand for adult social care. I don't know what the picture is currently for children's exactly, but just people understanding that £30 million in the context of some statutory services that we have to deliver feels like that might be rather than it just being a deficit, because a deficit sounds like we're not, it sounds like you're not doing your job well, which, you are. It's just really challenging in the context that you're in. I suppose it's just also whether or not in that section there's any way of including anything that is about how close to the edge we are if we don't do some of these things. I assume that we're not in the position to be asking people what else we want to do, because that's not the budgetary position that we're in. So I think we just need to be clear about how close to the edge we are if we don't do some of these things. And then the other thing, Chair, if you'll permit me, it's under section 2, but I won't come in on that section. Just on the opportunities for funding, things like the fact that there might be more opportunities around free school meals, for example, because of the change in government. Just whether or not, I appreciate those aren't council opportunities, but they are opportunities to expand something the council is already doing in delivering those free school meals. So just those are the things that struck me, that we need to just be, I think, as clear as we possibly can be, both about increasing demand and overspend that is already taking place in some of those budgets, particularly in adults, and just making sure that people understand how close to the edge we are if we don't do that.
Okay, so it's kind of framing in terms of how the context. Okay, Councillor Merritt.
Yes, a couple of things. Share the concern about question 2. I mean, I think in reality there hasn't been a year for quite a long time when we haven't done a combination. Council hasn't done a combination of those 3 things. The issues being the balance. So I think that question does need re-looking at. Up further up that page 98, on raising money, there's the adding a fee for tourists staying overnight. That's voluntary, isn't it? I wonder if we should make that clear as opposed to compulsory. Just a minor point, so as not to send too many hairs running. The other question I just wanted to ask on the original papers, how does your allowance of 3% for the pay award actually sit against the inflation rate on which the annual pay awards are usually based?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult because a pay award's now been a fixed sum of £1,900, which means the percentage doesn't really mean as much now, because obviously £1,900 for a lower paid versus the higher paid. So it's more based on, we calculate what we think it will cost us, and then we say what percentage that is. So it's been really challenging with pay award. We do know what the foundation living wage will be from April, so we've also incorporated that from April, because it's not just the national living wage, is it? We pay the real living wage, so we've tried to roll all that in as best as we can.
Thank you. And Councillor Widdowson.
Just a couple of things. I'm building on what a lot of different people have said and what you said to start with. You really need to watch the language, because if you're going to go out to everybody to do this, you're looking at an 8, 9, 10-year-old reading. You've got to have it so that you can read the Sun. It's that level of language, and some of this is quite complex. And when you go further down, and I only say it once, when you go further down, more than half the people in the country do not understand percentages. So you putting in 5% or 7% means nothing to actually put the context in, which I think is the main point that everybody's trying to make, Debbie, is you need to say if it's a 5% increase in council tax, it means X amount each year. If it's a whatever percentage it is on the on the parking, it means it's going from 15 quid a day to 25 quid a day. Put absolutes in, they'll get it. But it is a really hard fact. The average reading and maths age in the country is 9 to 10-year-old.
Yeah, this is a draft, and we have it's the next section, but under the council tax section, for example, we have put in what that would mean for a band D. Like, what would that be, a weekly increase in pounds and pence? So yeah, absolutely take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you. So still gathering comments on section 1 and the preamble to that. So Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just again, I guess it's sort of around language really. So in the preamble, I think there's some ands that maybe ought to be ors, because I think that some of the framing is around sort of trying to get people to think about these are the types of things where you can have this, but that means you can't have that, or if you do that, then you know this. So it's just being absolutely clear, both in terms of the comms team, but also making sure the executive are clear on where ands should be ands and where ands might be ors. So I think depending on what we're trying to drive at, I think there's just some little tweaks there. And then also just picking up on this point around this question too. I don't know whether it's appropriate or not. I absolutely kind of agree in a sense of, you know, on the one hand, nobody wants to be cutting anything at all, and on the other hand, like everybody's always got to do it. And the question really is about where does the line fall between? And I'm just wondering if there's a way of phrasing it, but again, this would depend whether this was really genuinely on the table or not. You know, what we're actually asking, I suppose, is, you know, do people tilt more towards wanting to raise more revenue in order to protect services, or do they focus on accepting reduced services and that meaning less of a raising of prices or taxes? You know, that's the political space that we all operate in, and I just wonder whether, if it's going to be meaningful, whether the question needs to be phrased more in those terms.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Eyre, then I'll invite Debbie to come and respond to any of the general points.
Much better question that, Councillor Crawshaw, than the one that's on there, and I'd happily support that particular question. But yeah, I wasn't going to mention, but when Councillor Merritt mentioned that one on page 98 in terms of hares running, there is that charging for traffic in the city centre. What is that? Could be a multitude of things. That could refer to your car parking fees. That could be resident parking. That could be a congestion charge. If you're going to put that in, I would suggest that you need a clear idea of what that is and an explanation. Otherwise, people are going to react in a way that to each of those three things in the way that they're likely to.
Having been reading the local transport strategy implementation plan today, I saw that, thought that. I don't know where that's come from. So it's, again, I think it's just making sure that there aren't kind of hares set running that need to be. Debbie, do you want to respond to any of this, some more general comments?
Yeah, I can take some of this away and speak to the comms team and just get their thoughts and views. I think in terms of the 30 million budget deficit, that is the approved medium-term financial strategy that was executive. So these are just changes in assumptions. So I think part of this message has already gone out around the 30 million. And actually, in some respects, the number doesn't really matter too much, because 24 million is just as unachievable as 30 million in some respects. So yeah, I'll take that point. I'll speak to comms around that. And I think it's supposed to be a reading age 10 when I looked at the target reading age of 10. So again, we can go in and have a look at some of the language. I think the challenge for this is our balance between trying to make this understandable at a region age 10 and explaining a local authority budget in the same context, because that is challenging. It's difficult. I think the issue around the balance of, do you want us to charge more so that we don't have to do as many cuts? I think the reality is we'll have to increase income and cuts as well. And I think that's part of our challenge. It's certainly your challenge as politicians is charging people more and giving them less, essentially. But that is the situation that you're in terms of the budget deficit. And then, that around the council tax flexibilities, I think we're in that really difficult grey area, aren't we, where I was saying to somebody, a couple of days after the budget, I've never been in a situation where I've been given so much information and yet still don't really know any more than I did. Was it you I said it to? Still don't really know any more than I did the day before. It's just like so much information, but you don't really know anything. It's really quite a frustrating period until we get the settlement. So yeah, and I take the points about setting hairs running. We've tried to phrase it in a way that is, these are proposals, suggestions, thoughts, ideas. They're not decisions, they're not facts, they're what do you think about these things? And I would hope that some of the context we should be building on. So this will be the sort of second or third time really that we've been out. So we've sort of tried to layer up in previous consultations more information about the challenge. Hence why the first question is, did you know about the challenge? Because that tells us about whether or not our message has been getting through. I know we've had a lot of engagement through social media, for example, but is it sticking, and are people remembering that there is this budget challenge? But yeah, I'll certainly take some of the comments away and speak to comms colleagues about how we can amend and update.
Thank you. Let's move on to section 2, ideas for raising money. Which is essentially council tax and parking, but asked in different ways, covering different aspects. So who would like to comment on that? Okay, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points. One, I think, I know this is on your draft and maybe you haven't looked at this yet, but how it's kind of laid out and numbered and that sort of thing, because it's in multiple sections which are numbered and not in order. And then in some sections, there's more questions which are also numbered, and some of them are just bullet points. And I don't know, it's a little bit, the structure is a little bit difficult to follow. But I'm sure that can be fixed. These sections, like mostly section 2 and 3, from reading the questions, I wasn't clear on whether the goal of these sections was to was about broad principles and what principles people support, or whether it was about specifics. And there's quite almost every question I felt like that. So like the one about reducing filling potholes by £60,000, are you asking whether people support the principle of pothole filling being an acceptable place to make cuts, or are you asking whether £60,000 is an appropriate amount to cut it by, without knowing what the total budget is and the context of that? And almost every question was like that. Residents parking, are you asking people whether the purpose of Res Park, whether the principle of Res Park is about charging people for taking up road space, or whether it should be used at all to encourage low emission vehicles? Or are you asking them specifically whether they support 5% as a rate of increase and 20% of a rate? Yeah, quite a few questions like that, where I just wasn't really sure whether you're asking people about whether they support the principle, or whether the principle has kind of been decided and you're asking what is the appropriate level to make changes. Yeah, which I think is just a kind of strategic question of what is the purpose of this consultation.
Okay. Yes, please.
I mean, Councillor Lomas might want to come in on this at some point, but I think the purpose of the consultation is to get some views and thoughts from residents, partners, businesses, anybody that's interested. It's not a vote. I don't think it's going to be a out of the however many people replied, 80% of them said this, so that's what we'll do. I think it's just to give executive some more richness of information and data and views, because ultimately it's you that makes the decision. This is just to give you some evidence, data, understanding of what people's views are before you make that decision.
But it's what views? Is it views about specific measures or views about broad principles?
I think it's views about specific measures, but again, I'll happily be corrected by Councillor Lomas if she thinks
in that case, there's a lot of specific measures missing. So how have you picked these ones?
Okay, Councillor Lomas is indicating. So
it's more of a political question.
I will invite her to join us. Councillor Lomas, can you hear us?
I can, yes. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can, yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. I've been making lots of notes as you've gone through, but just on that question, it's really difficult when you do a consultation on difficult decisions that we as politicians have been elected to make. We want to gather people's views on the things that we are thinking about, but we can't present that as if it is in some way a kind of poll that, you know, if enough people say yes to this, it'll definitely happen. And if enough people say no to that, it'll definitely not happen. So I think there's a really careful balance to strike in this, and really interesting to hear people's views on, you know, how we get that right in the way that we present this. But ultimately, we're presenting these kind of general areas to the public because these are things that we are considering that we might do in our budget. And so we want to hear people's kind of response to that. Now, they might have a response to the principle of it, they might have a response to the specifics of it, and both of those are absolutely fine. What we can't do is we can't go through line by line every single item that the council spends money on and get people's input on it, because I think it'd just take us a decade probably to go through. I think it's much more helpful to look at the things that we're thinking about changing, and get people's views on that, and that's absolutely what we're encouraging people to share.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Melly, I think you had a supplementary.
Yeah, I mean, so my point really was, so for example, one of the questions, it doesn't have a number, so I can't refer to it very easily, but the question basically is, do you support reducing, spending £60,000 less on road improvements? And it's multiple choice, just, you know, strong support, neutral, oppose, strongly oppose. So if someone answers oppose, they oppose spending £60,000 less on road improvements. How do you know if that's that they oppose spending less on road improvements, or they oppose spending £60,000 less because actually it should be £100,000 less? Like how is this going to give you the answers that you're asking for? If it's not clear if it's on the principle or the amount.
If I can, Chair, come in.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that this isn't a poll, it isn't a question where we're saying to people, you vote on this and then we will do it or not do it. This is about getting people's feedback on the areas that we're proposing to change. So in essence, you know, we want to hear their views on the things that we're looking at, but whether that's about £60,000, £30,000, £90,000, it doesn't, you know, that's almost less relevant than their reaction to us spending less on that particular area.
Yeah, I think I think there's probably an issue in that question in particular, how it's phrased to make it kind of to make the context a bit clearer. In the, is it the principle of a reduction in funding? In some ways, the amount is, I would argue, kind of less relevant in terms of, if it's about the principle, do you think we should spend a bit less on road repairs? That's, you'd probably get, I don't know, a different answer. Or do you think we should cut £60,000, cut less, cut more? So I don't want to get into too long a debate, but I think there is something around how that is phrased to make it more apparent what, if it's principle or if it's degree of reduction that's you're wanting the feedback on. But thank you for that. Got some more hands. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Surprised to no one. I want to ask a question about the Res Park question. The 5% increase for residents' parking schemes. Basically, my main question is there a statutory limit to what we can charge for residents' parking? And is it also is it also enforced that there needs to be a lower amount for a first car than there would be for supplementary cars?
As far as I'm aware, there isn't a statutory limit or any statutory definition of residence parking scheme, but I will double check.
Okay, thank you, because that would be a very interesting one to know.
Sorry. So, well, we're not going to have a debate about the details of Res Park. We've got very limited time, so we can. Yeah, we can return to that, but we've got a lot of ground to cover. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief as possible. I think the issue with that 60,000 is it clearly refers to something, because you wouldn't just pick 60,000. So it's the not mentioning what the 60,000 is that seems to cause a confusion. But general point on section 2, there's far too many leading questions. This increase will help us to keep important services running without making big cuts. Do you agree? Well, who's going to say no? So take out a lot of the leading questions that lead through that. But the two that I really want to focus on were, and it's around context and wider policy issues. And I think you get different answers from different people depending on how you ask the question. So car parking rates, you list the rates. We've discussed about this, putting them in context. I've done a quick bit of maths. That's between 70% and 56% increase in those car parking charges. A lot of people won't know that it's £5.30. I didn't know that we had standard and premium car parking, to be honest, but I've discovered now that some charge £4.30 an hour, some charge £4.10 an hour. Why that's happened, I don't know, but I don't know if that's the premium and standard. But for those people that don't know that, saying £5.30 doesn't put in context. So if you say, do you agree with the 70% increase in charging and a 56% increase in car parking charges? One of the interesting things about that is you'll get an answer from people that don't necessarily use it. For example, so businesses would have a view on whether a 76% increase in parking charges would think. Even some residents would think, well, actually 76% increase in parking charges, that might impact on our tourism, that might interest on our works, etc. So that puts in a different thing. And again, the second part of that I thought is you need to put it in a policy context. So this particular paper builds in, and again, it's asking different questions. This particular one adds in another £1.2 million income from parking. We have a stated council policy to remove 600 car parking spaces from the city centre. There are questions and issues about displacement, but one of those questions should be around this, in my opinion. Do you think it's right to build in another 20 to 30% income from car parking when the council stated policy is to reduce the number of cars entering the city centre, reduce the number of car parking spaces by over 500? Is it sensible to build short-term income that isn't going to be there necessarily in 2 to 3 years' time? And again, you could get a very, very different answer. Even people who use those car parks will say, well, actually, no, it's a bit of a daft idea to keep relying on car park income while closing car parks.
I'm going to carry on going around gathering feedback, and then any observations Debbie or Councillor Lomas want to make at the end. Councillor Coles.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just on ideas for raising money, the one that isn't there, which is just around kind of collaboration and looking at services and how services are delivered differently. It's not there. And if I'm honest, it's been one of my biggest frustrations in this role is how pedantic things get at the point of budget setting because of the political opportunity of individual particular lines of budgets being looked at again. And actually, you know, things in the previous budget around rough sleeping, for example, that whole service has now been brought in-house as a result of the budget changes that were made previously, which actually incidentally will probably protect us from the national insurance change going forward, because those people will be employed by the council. And actually, just I think there is something in collaboration, doing things differently, and some of that is difficult because you do have to stop doing things in order to start doing them differently in a different way and working differently between council departments, which I know that officers have been working really hard on because we want to retain the maximum and the best possible services for residents. Ultimately, I think we're probably all on the same page around that. We all want to improve those services. And actually, sometimes the politics gets in the way of some of that collaboration and positive working that I know officers are trying to do. But I don't know whether it's worth reflecting on whether there's a way of putting any of that in there. That may not be worth it from a public consultation point of view, but actually I think in terms of the opportunities for the council, that feels like it is another one of the hopefully vaguely positive ones.
It can maybe be worked into section 3, the sort of saving money and cutting costs, and maybe adding and redesigning services or some other way of describing it. Councillor Merritt.
Yes. in terms of these sections, there's sort of different presentations in different parts. So on a lot of the sections in the report, it says how much money we're going to save a year for those services. But then on the council tax one, it doesn't actually give the equivalent in terms of what money that will raise per annum. And that actually then also flags back to, in section 1, you referred to 30 million deficit, which is actually over, a 3-year deficit. So if most of the paper is couched in terms of monies in a particular year, then perhaps the framework should say that. And you might perhaps think section ideas for saving money, it might be worth putting the suggestions in this section would potentially raise 3 million against the 10 million that we need to save each year. So people actually have a clearer idea, right, of how it all fits together, and there's the same framework for each section.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Councillor Rose.
Thanks. So, two bits. One bit's a bit more pedantic, so I'll go first on that because it's more just for note, and the second one is an actual question. On the wording choices and what we've got here, just to flag a few points, I guess, page 100 at the top, it says, here's how we could raise money, and then immediately says, here's what we are planning. And I think we just need to be clear throughout what that means in practice. And we've got in the line underneath that, you've got there would be an extra 10%, and then it says Minster badge will still get, so the could, would, should, etc. Be good to make sure that we're asking exactly what we want to ask on that. And from a pedantic perspective, there's also some other bits in there, like, for example, the cost of a Minster badge would go up from 30 to 45 for 2 years. If that then goes up the following year for 2 years, people might go, well, actually, I thought you were freezing the price to 45 quid for 2 years, but actually you're buying a £45 2-year Minster badge. So it's just some of those wordings. I think, I know this is only a draft, so just kind of raising those for comment, for note. The specific question I wanted to ask Katie was, we mentioned already about tourism levy and the fact that's voluntary, and then also we're in the section on raising money. There's nothing in here about potentially charging for using council service or monetizing more of what the council can do to a wider audience. There are various ways we could do that, but if you've got an unadopted road and you've got potholes, can you go to the council and pay us rather than having to deal with trying to find your own workers, stuff like that potentially. And on the levy, I guess, is there not merit in having a response here? Whether I know we all know the challenges, but if the law changes to allow us to do it, already having the evidence of how many people would want us to do it as a non-voluntary thing would be useful. But also, if we do need to go and talk to organisations and say there is a strong sentiment in the community in favour of this, is it not beneficial to have lots of numbers for that as well?
Okay. So I'll invite Debbie and Councillor Lomas just to respond to any of the issues raised.
Yeah. So thank you for those suggestions. I would just say that I think the challenge with this, I'll say it again, is this is a consultation document on key themes and principles set at reading age 10. There's only so much that we can do in this document. I suppose we'll just point out that alongside the questionnaire, there will be workshops and other more detailed focus groups where we can get into some of the detail. So we can't do everything in this one questionnaire. So there's just a bit of a balance there around what is possible. In terms of things like the collaboration and working differently, we had included that, again, in the body of the report. That's one of the proposals that I've included around sort of business process reengineering and improved ways of working. I think, again, I mean, my view was, who's going to say no to that? So I thought, what's the point of having a question on it? Because everybody's going to say, well, yeah, of course I want you to work better if it saves money. But again, I take members' point around this. That's the same issue, I guess, as question 2, which is, so yeah, there's something maybe we could add in about that. We've got some bits of it again, but the challenge is keeping it at reading age 10. That's been a real challenge, because you could really do quite a lot of what you suggested, but you can't do that and keep it at reading age 10. So that's the kind of, where we've had a bit of an issue. And I think and again, so I think it was Councillor Merritt that said, well, some of the numbers I agree are a bit confused actually, and it's because in the previous round of consultation, what people were saying to us, well, we need more numbers actually. They were saying, well, yeah, we might say spend less on highways maintenance, but how much would it save? And so that's why we've tried to put in some numbers. And on that one on highways, actually, it would be a capital, and that would be the revenue impact. So it would be more significant reduction of say 600,000 from the capital programme to save £60,000 in capital borrowing costs, for example. But again, you can't explain that at reading age 10. So I think you're pointing out some of the absolutely valid issues and valid concerns that we've had. I suppose I'm just trying to manage expectations about how many of them I'll be able to resolve for this consultation, but we can certainly, you know, improve them for future ones, really.
Okay. No. And you know, but as you said, this is first time we've taken this approach, so there's certainly no it's not, we're not trying to pick holes for the sake of it. Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And thank you everyone for all of the really helpful feedback. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. The collaboration and changes to ways of working. I think it's a really interesting one, and I think we almost we've taken that as read, but you're quite right. We need to be explicit about it, and we need to be reinforcing to people that is underpinning everything that we're doing at the moment. And the kind of the could, would, should confusion, I think, just reflects us doing this in several different ways to try and find some way of presenting it that will be helpful. So that's useful feedback. And charging for services that we either provide without charge at the moment, or where we can charge it to some kind of potential customers, I think is a really interesting one, and something that we need to look further at. And again, a couple of people have mentioned about how to get the context of the impact of the proposals and the ideas, and I think it's going to be a really delicate balancing act, and we're absolutely not going to get it perfectly right this time, but we will undoubtedly learn a lot from it. But the more feedback, the better on that before we publish the consultation.
Thank you. Let's move on to section 3, saving money and cutting costs. We've already captured some feedback. Councillor Coles' comments around the collaboration work. I'll start off with an initial comment, really, in terms of a couple of the ideas around changing how we run community safety and removing some local recycling containers, but retaining those which serve a specific community need. I'm not sure I understand necessarily how you would demonstrate whether a recycling container served a specific community need or didn't. And the community safety thing, I think, would need more explanation in order to be clear, A, what services that relates to, and B, how those services would change. Councillor Melly.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's just not necessarily that the question shouldn't be there, but just the wording of it. So that one about community safety, I mean, if you can save £6,000 without making any difference to the service at all, then, you know, that kind of seems like a no-brainer. Why wasn't it done years ago? There isn't really enough information for people to know what the impacts of that are, or what community safety is and what the impacts would be of cutting it. So I think that needs more background for people to actually be able to express an opinion. And kind of the same with the Make It York one. It says, do you support this change? But I don't think it explains what change. I'm not sure what change it's referring to. I think there's a few questions here that need more context. I know you're trying to keep it short and sweet and to the point, but I think there's just a few questions that are lacking enough information for anyone to really be able to have an opinion to share with us.
I shall carry on going around gathering more comments. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the local recycling containers, yeah, I don't know whether it should come under section 6 instead, because it's a waste issue, but also whether there are opportunities to maybe look at doing it the other way around. When you've got local recycling containers that are situated somewhere that can be then used by residents, rather than having individual bin collections, which are presumably much more expensive, is there any scope whatsoever for cost reasons, but also for environmental reasons possibly, to move towards using local recycling centres as the main method of that sort of disposal? I know that's probably a new idea that I've just thrown out there, but it could be an idea.
Thank you for that suggestion. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that last time. No, I guess I'm not going to go through the thoughts on each line item, but two points to call out. Number one is, yeah, I mean, I'd love us to be able to bullet point change how every service is, and it will save this amount without having any impact on every single bullet point. But it would need to say more about what that means pragmatically. Otherwise, we're just saying make things more efficient a bunch of times in a row. So that community safety one, especially in contrast to, 100 grand of removing or reducing CCTV coverage may impact it without saying in what ways or to what extent. Again, without adding more detail and more words, it's quite tricky. And then the other one I want to call out specifically was 720k bus subsidies, which I don't actually know, and I should know probably, how much we offer and how much we pay in bus subsidies total. But that feels like, is that all of it? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I guess the question here presumably feels less like this is a proposal to remove all bus subsidies we do, and more just we currently spend this amount. What are your thoughts about doing something and asking a more pertinent question of, if we need to reduce some bus subsidies, how should we look at which bus subsidies to remove, or should we be removing it based on geography or based on different types of subsidy on demographics? Maybe what's that question trying to achieve? Because I was surprised to see that we might save 720 grand next year, but if that's 100% of bus subsidies, I guess we're asking that question with a different intent.
Yeah, no, I think I remember when, I can't remember when it was, but there is now a formula around the threshold at which bus subsidies will potentially come into question, in terms of if the number of passengers using a subsidised service goes below a certain level, or if the subsidy equates to a certain amount per head of passenger, it then comes into question in terms of, and that's kind of, so I think there's a risk of potentially of a sort of a crossover between policy we already have that does dictate at what point you have to make a difficult decision around, well, that's not, we can't subsidise that service any longer, and this which suggests, well, actually we'll just come up with some other process to decide. So it's,
yeah, I guess the second half is, so that's if we're just kind of subsidising routes and giving that money, but are we subsidising certain types of pass or other ways in which we're subsidising buses broadly that we're not teasing out on this? And if I don't know if we are or not currently, and I'm not 100% sure on some of these specifics, the average person will need that information in front of them to be able to comment on it.
Okay, so I'll gather some more comments and then bring Debbie and Councillor Lomas in. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. In the spirit of this paper, I'll try and avoid duplication and efficiencies in comments. So I had the same issues about most of this section. I'll even go into the next section as well, section 4, and cover that off, because I think section 4 is exactly the same. Neither of these sections has enough information. I think bus subsidies is a good one, because most people probably won't know that their bus service is subsidised. So that it was only when the subsidy goes that they then lose their bus service and go, actually, I think bus subsidy is a good idea. But it doesn't say on the bus, by the way, you only have this bus because it's subsidised by the council. So, which leads me to the next question that bit that I had, was about trying to do things that are different. We need to make sure that we're capturing area variation, which I thought of with the recycle containers. If you happen to be in an area that has those services, you are going to say, no, this is a bad idea, taking them away because it's really good. My ward doesn't have any of them, so everybody in my ward will just tick the box saying, yeah, lose them, absolutely rubbish idea. I don't know. And we used to have that with ward committee votes, where different areas would vote against every other area, and then you end up with basically a variance of 0. So you have no data whatsoever because half the people say it's rubbish because they don't use it. Half the people say it's brilliant because they do use it, and you end up with no decent data at all. So we need to make sure we're capturing that level of it. And then the final bit I think that's missing, Councillor Healy just mentioned actually as well, we've done it before, is including what the total budget is. So there's bits of it in terms of which we've had that conversation with bus subsidies, but equally street lighting, traffic light replacement, removing street lighting, unless people sort of know if that's like reduce it by 2%, then people might go, yeah, fair enough. But actually a figure could be absolutely everything, could be just a slight reduction in the service provided. So if we could try to make sure where we're specifying savings, so there's some context of saying £60,000 from a budget of £3.5 million, it will allow people to put in better context.
Thank you. And Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I think where there are specific numbers used, it looks like there's already a target being identified, but not with sufficient detail for people to appreciate what that is. So I think it generates a degree of suspicion, I'm afraid. And particularly with community safety, that just seems a very precise number to come out with. And the other issues are very specific. I've many years experience of battling with officers on the local recycling schemes, in terms of, do people realise what they'll lose if they tick that box? If they do, fair enough. But if they've got the information in front of them, then it's an informed decision. But this looks a bit like battleship accounting, where you know what it is that you're trying to get at, but you're trying at the same time to get the public to say, without really knowing the full facts, yes, you said that we could do this, and we've run up and we'll do it. And people say, hold on, we didn't sign up to that. Just taking section 4, investing into the future, because Debbie, at the last meeting, you mentioned that you were looking at something similar to the blueprints. I brought some with me because I keep them. They're very valuable, and this is adult social care, this is housing services, and ICT. And it's understanding, will we get this level of detail of what changes will happen to the services that people get before that change is implemented? Is that what this new team for change will do, and how will we see that outcome?
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. It's quite interesting sort of hearing the conversation, and I'm having a little bit of a wry smile to myself about the complaints about a consultation that appears to have leading answers, when I'm sure we threw similar criticisms in the other direction, not that long ago. I suppose, that then comes back to what's the purpose of this whole exercise, and what is it that we're seeking to kind of try to understand? And I think, Debbie and Councillor Lomas have both been quite clear that it's not a, it's not a vote. It's not a, if 80% of the people vote for this particular reduction, then that's what goes in. But if it's about a sort of a steer on particular areas that people are more willing to see cuts going into, then I wonder if it just needs grouping in slightly different ways. If it's about actually getting people to think about what the council does and why it does it, and what other types of services that are priorities. What I find quite interesting is, and apologies that I'm slightly skipping ahead, but on the section 5, where there's a thing that sort of says, if you didn't agree to 2 or more of our suggestions, then what would you do? Presumably we could, if we chose to, give people a sort of a fixed set of options, so that you can't just select, I won't cut any of these services, or I strongly disagree with any of these cuts. And you can actually kind of say, well, what we'd like to do is engage you in a where, you know, if you're the person who is the decision maker who has to make the cuts, where would you emphasize your cuts on? Which I personally think would give a much more interesting set of outcomes than do you or don't you agree in a £60,000 cut to X service or otherwise, because as has been said repeatedly, unless you have a real understanding of the context or what that figure is in relation to the overall thing, it kind of is meaningless.
Okay, so is this a comment on section 3?
Comment into, I am going to have to go because I'm starting to fall over.
That's fine. You,
But
you
before-
make your contribution.
Before I do disappear, I think we've got to be really careful. We got elected to make these decisions. You said some of it is political. If we throw the whole gambit back at residents, first of all, they'll say, what the hell have you been elected for? Secondly, they're not going to spend the amount of time we spent this evening looking at it. And thirdly, I think they'd be right to say, go off and do your job. Right,
Okay.
I'm going home because I feel lousy.
That's fine. So Debbie, I don't know if you want to come back on any of the points raised, and I'll bring Councillor Lomas.
I can, I'll take some of the comments away about things like including the total budget. Again, it just gets a bit complicated with the reading age 10 thing, so then you've got to explain it and it makes it really unwieldy. And some of these, again, might not be able to do for this one because we're due to go live with it very soon, but we'll bear in mind for future ones. I'll look at where we can rephrase. I take your point, Councillor, about the ward analysis. I'll have to check what ward information we'll have actually. I presume we're asking for postcode or something, so I will check that out. I mean, in terms of bus subsidies, it's not statutory. You can stop it all now. You can stop it tomorrow. It's not statutory. You don't have to do it. You want to do it for lots of reasons, but you don't have to do it. So again, from an officer perspective, we try to stay to things that are not statutory because you need to protect your statutory services. So that's why it's a bit of a mixed bag, because it's what is statutory and what is not statutory. Some stuff. Sorry. And yes, in terms of the team for change, we've just advertised one post so far, and the closing date was yesterday. Actually, we had 40 applications, so we've been shortlisting those today. So we've had a really good response to that. And the honest answer to your question, Councillor Waller, is I don't know yet, because we're sort of starting this again a bit from scratch. And when we get the person in post as a head of transformation, we will then start to pull together. We've done some work in it already, but we need to pull together that kind of programme of work, and we need to bring in all the suggestions and ideas and ongoing projects and other work into that overarching programme, a transformation programme that's properly scheduled, and there will be a governance. So there'll be an opportunity to incorporate some of those comments around the level of detail that we might have had in the blueprints from previous transformation, and a bit more of a timeline about when we'll be able to come and talk to Scrutiny in particular around the proposals and how that's working. So that'll be something to be confirmed, I guess, when we get the person in post. And I guess just the other point I'd make is around the capacity and cost of consultation, so the capacity of officers to do this work and analyse the results in time to give back to the administration for them to actually make a decision. So, we need the sort of budget balance by Christmas in our reality so that we can get the reports through for executive. And the more we do, the more it costs. So again, we just need to be have that in our minds around not spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on consultation about, because you know what the first answer is going to be about how you can save money, isn't it? Right? You can stop doing these consultations. That's a really great way to save money. So it's just, again, it's about balance. So just make those points.
Thank you. Councillor Lomas, do you want to respond to any of the points made?
Yeah, Debbie's made some really helpful points, I think, and there's quite a lot of the comments that have been made that are about how we phrase the kind of the questions we're asking, but also the additional information we give to provide context, which is really helpful, because getting that balance right is going to be really crucial. Just a couple of specific points on the bus subsidies. That is the additional subsidy that we pay from council revenue on top of the central bus subsidy. So it's kind of the as Debbie said, the non-statutory element of that. there's been a couple of comments around if you don't vote for something or if you vote against something. And again, we're really trying hard not to present this as a poll or a vote, because you're absolutely right, Councillor Eyre, that if people have no knowledge or experience of a particular element of council service, then they're not likely to prioritise it. But it might be something that actually, 90% of other residents do value highly. So it isn't a vote or a poll. And I know Councillor Widdowson's left, but she has a point where she says that we were elected to make these really difficult decisions, and we were, and that's what we will do. But it is also absolutely right that we ask for people's views before making those decisions. And I go back to Councillor Waller, similar point. Do people realise what they'll lose if they tick that box? Well, in a lot of senses, it's not about them, ticking a box to win or lose something. It's about them having their say. Councillor Crawshaw talked about grouping things differently, and I think that's a really interesting one, and also potentially quite tricky to do. So I think we can definitely do something around that to make it flow better. But perhaps something we need to think of in a bit more detail for next time. And in terms of asking people if they were making the decisions, which areas would they cut, that was where I started in my head. And I was soon to realise that wasn't going to be feasible this year, but definitely something that speaks to some of the findings from the first round of consultation, where people answered in a certain way when they did the survey, but then when they were in a workshop and they had the chance to discuss and explore things in more detail, they changed their position and their viewpoint, which I think goes to what quite a lot of you have been saying through the evening about the context that we give, the information that we give people to help them to understand really what the budget process is all about.
Thank you. Could I just ask Councillor Waller to turn off Councillor Widdowson's microphone, please? Thank you. We're nearly there. Section 4, which we've already touched on in terms of a new team for change and better contract management. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. From my memory from when I was last here and the intervening years, we've tried to do this on at least one occasion, if not two. What makes you think that this time it's going to be a success, whereas previously I would question that it probably hasn't, given the fact that that team is now being recreated?
So if you hold that thought, I'll gather some other comments. Councillor Burton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on number 7 about the new team, it sounds like we've already appointed the person who's the new member of staff. The way it's worded doesn't provide me with a lot of detail about what that team is going to look like. What it does, I just wonder whether it's worth, if we've already made the decision and it's already going to happen, whether it's worth putting in. It's a question, I guess.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Thanks. I'll wrap up all my remaining comments into a quick flurry. I think ditch section 4 altogether. I think you've got question 7 is about a new team for change, and question 8 about improving contract management. But as with before, I don't know how you'd answer this other than if it saves money, great. And I think you can put those into section 5 as other cost saving. Here's a thing we're looking at doing. Here's another thing we're looking at doing. Here's the sections. Any comments? And I think that shortens it a little bit and takes out some of the complexity. But honestly, I don't know how I'd answer section 4. And then the final point, I guess, from me on this in general is I still feel slightly anxious whenever I come into these processes about the fact that if we do everything on here, we're still not bridging the gap. So how do we capture the what else should we be doing beyond what's on this? I know that that's what that final question does, but if we do everything on here and then a bunch of other suggestions, we still might not bridge that gap. How do we better tell people what physically could be cut, what isn't statutory that isn't listed here? Because this feels like we're already getting quite close to the bone on here's everything we can think of that isn't statutory, including everything that's bus related that's not statutory. So it's not a question for now, but it's I guess a comment for us to take away. How can we better inform people on what else they can say? Because otherwise people might just go, oh yeah, it says 37 pence adult care. Why don't we just make that 22 pence adult care, even though we can't physically do that?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'll simply try and get all my comments into one as well when I get all the way to the paper. Following on from what Councillor Healy said, and I think it's something we haven't touched on here, is we're talking a lot about public consultation. My recollection of why these things didn't work before is because there were issues internally, and when you have members of staff who are working across the council, transforming services across the council, that only works if everybody across the council buys into that individual's vision. So I think this question, taking on board what Councillor Rose said about the problem externally, that's probably a better question to ask internally and ask staff and have those conversations about how do we make sure this role works. It isn't seen as somebody who is sort of spying on and criticising what everybody does, I think, in terms of working on that. And then I got the same point that Councillor Rose has got. There's still probably £15 million missing from this. So there needs to be some admission in the consultation that that's still missing. This only covers so much. How are we going to do it so people trust you that you're talking about that? And then my last couple of points were, again, similar things. Section 5 and Section 6. That first line on Section 5 is a bit odd. If you did not agree with 2 or more of our suggestions, please tell us. Well, please tell us anyway. Just if you have any more suggestions, don't codify. Well, actually, I disagreed with one of them, so I can't answer that particular question. And similarly, on the feedback and communication, it says if you're neutral or ineffective view of the consultation, what could we improve? Well, just ask them what could we do to improve. You could still think, yeah, I think it was a very good consultation, but it would have been better if you did this. We don't need to caveat it, say only if you don't like it, suggest improvement.
Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly on something Councillor Eyre said, where it's not just about consulting residents, but also need to consult internally within the council. Also, if there's folks there perhaps on business organisations as well, specifically to reach out to, because they, I think it's been raised earlier, might have different views on things that are worth knowing about. So just making sure that we have perhaps an organisational consultation as well as, of course, consulting residents. But I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. And I think David did mention there'll be other activities alongside this purely web-based and paper-based consultation in terms of other communities of interest. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, it sort of repeats the point I was making about consistency of presentation earlier, but Section 4 doesn't have any costs on those particular items. And Section 5, we have the pie chart and the breakdown, and it doesn't tell you that it's for £1 of council expenditure that you're splitting it up on. And should we be doing it in £1 of council expenditure when we're actually doing the absolute expenditures everywhere else in the document? Actually, should we not just use the total sums that we're spending per annum in this?
Okay, Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm just that Section 5 question, which was sort of something of what I was getting at before, really, in a way. And again, I'm just slightly thinking out loud here. I do totally take the point in a sense that if you didn't agree with 2 or more, like that's sort of irrelevant. But then maybe the follow on from that, and perhaps again, this is the context of the whole thing. Maybe you could just ask people to rank. So these are all of the areas of council spending. Rank them priority order 1 to 8 or whatever it is in terms of your priority for supporting or your priority for reducing. And actually that kind of drives at a lot of what this whole consultation is really getting at. So whether or not you do that in complement to the other questions that have been put in there, which are perhaps then a bit more specific about some examples of specific changes that there might be. But again, it speaks to the point that I was trying to make before of, you know, what exactly are we doing this consultation for? What are we seeking to get from it? Is it agreement? Well, I think that's been quite clearly said repeatedly that it's not about that. So if it's then about a steer, well, a broad steer on areas, I think you get that from that sort of ranking. Or where I think it's much more interesting is actually about trying to have a conversation with the wider community about some of those difficult choices. And I absolutely agree with the points that are made about, you know, we're elected to make those difficult choices and all the rest of it, but that doesn't mean that a piece of work around having a conversation, an ongoing conversation with the wider city about the challenges that we all face and where our choices may or may not fall according to our values and political, you know, persuasions.
Yeah. Thank you. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, it was just a brief one. I've been through this series with David, and because I was high on that ranking thing. The problem with the ranking thing has always been people don't understand tipping points. So we used to have sliders and all sorts, and everybody would go culture and leisure, down you go, adult social care, up you go. And then you put it in context and go, right, well, you mean 3 leisure centres will close, 6 libraries, and they go, oh, no, I didn't mean that. No, put that one back up again. So without actually even having that very, because it's always culture and leisure is always the one that people start the slider going downwards, and then the slider we had used to have a little thing on it. It came and showed you the consequences. It said, right, that means you've lost this, this, and this. And I'd go, oh, put it back again.
I always think the most interesting thing about those sliders, though, Councillor Ayer, was how many people started it and abandoned it because it was just too difficult. And that was the most interesting statistic that we got, is that most people found it virtually impossible to balance the budget.
Debbie, do you want to respond to any of the points made?
So yeah, take your point about whether we should just remove this section completely. I'll take that away. I think Councillor Burton, yes, take your point. If we've only gone out to advert for a temporary post initially, so we haven't created the team. We've just gone out for some temporary capacity to help us put together a programme of work. But absolutely take your point about that. Yeah, include that it's still not balanced. We can do that. And yes, we will be doing staff consultation. That's been ongoing, and I take on board the things about consistency of presentation. As we've said, ranking is problematic because people struggle to do it without a lot of detail. And again, part of the feedback we had from the first or second stage of consultation was we can't do this without a lot more information. So that's why we didn't have a ranking question in. But I take your point again as well about additional suggestions. Yeah, you could just say, if you don't agree with any of our suggestions, tell us which services you'd like to be reduced. And the pie chart, again, this was a draft, so I don't know whether that's still in the latest version or not, quite honestly, but it's about using what we've already got available and what people are familiar with to try and help people understand. And just Councillor Healy's point about why will it work this time? Well, I think we have got buy-in and commitment this time. I'm not saying we didn't have it last time, but we've certainly got buy-in and commitment from senior management, from the executive, and from staff, actually, in many areas, not exclusively. And what we've tried to focus on in the recruitment for the 12-month temporary contract that we've put out is that focus on people. It's not about IT and digital and that kind of, transformation. It is about explaining the journey and the people work in terms of our staff, our residents, our elected politicians. And I think it will be different this time because, well, third time lucky, I don't know, maybe that's the reason, but we're not going big bang. We're not bringing in loads of consultants and loads of people. We're bringing in 1 or 2 people to give us some capacity to look, and it will be directors that lead transformation. It will be departments that lead transformation with some support and resource to help them manage it, to help them programme the work, and to allow us at a senior manager level to see, to programme the work. You can't do everything all at once. We can't do everything in a year. It's got to be a programme of work over a 3-year period. We've got to acknowledge that and be open about that. And so that initial piece of work will allow us to say, here is our programme, 3-year work programme, essentially. So I can't tell you that it definitely will be different, but I think the circumstances are different.
I'll bring in Councillor Crawshaw, then Councillor Lomas to make any final observations.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'll just be very quick. So this is just kind of for my clarity, but so the section 5 on these additional suggestions, I'd read that as being that people would be able to check against each of these areas and then put in their comments. And by checking against those areas, you are effectively ranking them. So you might only check 2, but unless you've got all of that context to know to check those 2, I don't know how you. So my sense would be you either have a reminder of that there are these sorts of areas and give us a sense of the sorts of things that you think we should be focusing on other than, you know, any of the other suggestions we've had. But taking absolutely the points that have been made around the complexity of how you do or don't rank, if you're offering people the choice to just choose one, they are effectively ranking that as their highest priority without any context.
Thank you. Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks everyone for all of the input. I think the thing about ranking is really tricky, and actually what I've heard everyone talking about is similar to the conversations that we've had about, do we rank things, do we not, do we give people kind of almost like a menu of council services and kind of invite them to indicate which they'd cut. And actually the learning from the first round of consultation was that people's perspective on that changed with more information, and once they had the opportunity to have a discussion about it. So I think it was Councillor Eyre who said, you know, people always say, oh, spend less on culture and leisure, until they understand that what that would mean was that they no longer have a leisure centre open close by to them. So we're trying to strike a really difficult balance, but it does occur to me that we can do more to help people to understand the breadth of council services, so that final question, however we frame it, is more meaningful to them, so that they've got this is the breadth of council services. What things would you opt for in terms of the budget? And that goes back to something which was also one of the findings from the first round of consultation, was that, you know, understandably a lot of people don't completely understand the what services councils are and aren't responsible for. So they were talking about wanting better access to GP appointments and for less sewage to be pumped into rivers, and actually the council has very minimal control over those things, and they're not services we directly provide. So I think there is something we can do around that, and you know, definitely some way of getting that more comprehensive information across.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, members. I think if we do this again next year, I think we can have a standalone meeting to talk about the budget. But I think we've covered quite a lot of ground, and thank you to everyone for a constructive discussion, which has been really really good to be part of. So thank you very much, and we look forward to this hitting the streets in whatever form it does. Okay, we're nearly there. Agenda item 8, monitoring and tracking of approved council motions. So this is a report for us to note and to raise any concerns about any issues, errors, omissions. Okay. Councillor Coles, please.
Thank you, Chair. Page 127, and I checked it with Pauline when she was still here. That action 2 has happened. It was one of the last things I did when I was on the exec, which is why I remember. So that it's not live, it's actioned, it's happened.
So 127, the second action on that page.
And I assume the first one is just ongoing of those bullets, but the second one had definitely happened.
So those can be updated. Yeah. Thank you. We're not debating the topic. We're just, is it? No, we're not. Not the purpose of this agenda item. We're not talking about the issues. We're looking about whether or not they've been completed or ongoing. Councillor Melly.
This is my first time doing this agenda item. I understand it's every 6 months. This is the first time I've done it. I wasn't sure whether like all motions are supposed to be in this, or it seems like there's some that are missing. Like we're in the past 6 months, there's been several council meetings and there've been 4 motions at each of those, and yet, you know, these are in date order and there aren't 4 motions for each date.
Correct.
So I was wondering why that is.
I think a number of other members were planning to raise the same issue.
Okay, I thought I wouldn't have been the only person who spotted it.
Yes, 'cause even if they've been completed, they should still be there.
Yeah. I had some questions about a couple of specific motions. Is that what we're doing in this agenda item? Like I said, my first time.
We're not debating whether the whether the action is appropriate in our view or not. It's really is the status accurate? Either nothing has happened, in which case fine, nothing's happened, it's still live. So we're not debating whether the action was appropriate or not. It's just whether this is an accurate reflection of reality. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, I'll ask some questions about reality. I'm feeling existential today. The motion about a community response to Israel and Gaza conflict, it says here that it's complete, that the executive member, a relevant executive member and relevant officer did urgently call for a long list of things. I didn't personally see that call. Where was that? Was that in the press or to government or like? And a question about the motion. No, oh, I'm sorry, I'm on petitions. No, I'm not.
Hold your horses, we'll do petitions.
Hold on a sec. I've got my colour-coded tabs. They've just let me down. Okay. Yeah, I've used the wrong colour tab on that one. That's why.
Not to worry, not to worry. So I'll gather comments and then I'll bring Lindsay in. See, Lindsay's got her hand up. Councillor Rose.
It's my first time coming to this agenda item as well. And aside from the point that it says it includes all details of all motions since May 2024, and it doesn't, actually looking through it, I have more comments about things that I think are accurate than could possibly be covered in the time we've got here to go through. I just think there's loads of stuff that's marked as complete that shouldn't be. And it actually gives me quite a concern for what's on, you know, what else we've said has been done in the past that just hasn't been done. We've had Scrutiny last week brought up a motion that isn't on this list from before May 2024 that said it's been done, but the agenda item was to talk about things that haven't happened yet, and that was one of them. So I don't know where to start or end with. No, I've got concerns around that.
Yeah, this has been, these are kind of third attempt at getting to a good place, and I think we've still got some work to do. So what would be really helpful outside of the meeting is if people can feed all of their very specific comments through to me. Myself and the vice chair can sit down with Democratic Services and try and bottom it out finally. But thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I won't go through the specific motions that are missing. I think the principle of looking back over the previous 6 months at all the motions that have come through and listing all of those, and then the committee agreeing that certain of them can be removed because they are complete and the other ones are held over, which I think is the principle that's kind of underwritten this, is a good one. And obviously there's some information missing. So my suggestion was going to be that either, and I suppose there's 2 options, we either don't seek to remove any of them tonight and say in 6 months' time we come with the whole year worth of stuff, or possibly have this back as a to note item, because I think there is benefit of having it in the public domain that these are the motions that have been passed and these are the things that have happened. So we could have a revised version of this to come to say the next or the next but one meeting just as a to note item, and then it gives members the opportunity to do that, as you've suggested, following up with the relevant people if they feel that there's queries or questions around the actions that have been taken.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion. Otherwise, we'll wait 6 months and then say, oh, it's still things missing. Councillor Whitcroft.
Oh, given that we weren't going through the specifics, then maybe not, other than to say that of the 3 motions I've submitted, not a single one of them
There you go.
is
I wouldn't-
included in the list.
Wouldn't
I
take
feel
it
so left
personally.
out.
I wouldn't take it personally. Councillor Eyre.
So was on first time caller, long time listener, definitely. But yeah, three specifically from 17th of the 7th all seem to be missed off, and that was the one that I particularly flagged. I think following on from Councillor Crawshaw, there are lots of things, perhaps clarity for the committee on what we can do when we don't, we're not happy with the resolution. If it's not for this committee, then it would be easy to at least have a column, something that says. So if, for example, for a bit of humour, there's one here about the executive publicly calling out cuts to bus subsidies. And we've just spent an hour and a half discussing cuts to bus subsidies. Stuff that's been referred to the mayor that I think probably shouldn't, but some level of clarity in this that says, yeah, it's not here to debate. We accept these are live, we accept these are closed. If you're not happy with the resolution that's come through on that, this is the particular format, be that a different scrutiny committee or taking up with the exec member.
Yeah. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, I think we're also going to have to be a little careful about live. Is this item like the proverbial Norwegian blue nailed to its perch and suffering severe neglect, or is something actually being done?
Ongoing is probably a better description. 6.5 dozen. Lindsay, I'll bring you in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Yeah, I think it's quite a difficult job for Democratic Services to try and get a handle on, what the status of these motions, because there are lots of different versions of this, the live motion tracker flying around. So we do appreciate, I can only apologise, we do appreciate that. It's not ideal, but the Director of Governance is looking at a better way to track motions and to report them to you. We are looking at whether there is something that sits within our existing committee software system that would allow us to do these a little bit smarter, a little bit better. So there is a one version of the live motion tracker that we then report to you. So apologies, we know it's not great, and we're looking at ways to do it better and to report it better to you. So take all the comments on board, and we'll work on getting that put right, and hopefully a more robust method of reporting these going forward.
Yes, well, let's not preempt the debate that might happen. But I think thank you, Lindsay, if I think the chair and vice chair meet up with yourself or with Dem Services colleagues, ideally in the next few weeks, because I think if we kind of lose sight of it, it'll just it'll drift off, and we'll be in a similar position in a few weeks' time. Yeah. Councillor Rose.
There's a question, I guess, for you as much as anybody else, Chair, which is, if we have concerns that maybe actions like writing a letter might not have happened and aren't necessarily tracked very well, we might have greater concerns that past motions that take a stance on something and say this is the council's position indefinitely aren't necessarily in perpetuity, or maybe our motions in general aren't necessarily doing the job they're supposed to do. Is that a job for this committee or for A&G to try and table that for a future meeting to have a discussion about what we're actually doing to make sure our motions do what they're supposed to do?
There's probably a whole separate debate about what weight council motions carry, and whether the executive of the day can choose to simply ignore them. That's probably a more deeper, not existential, but fundamental debate about the power of full council compared to executive, which I'm not saying we shouldn't be had, but it's probably one for A&G maybe in the context of the constitutional review. Just queuing that next one up for colleagues who are looking at that. I think we're done with motions. Shall we, with some trepidation, move on to the schedule of petitions? Councillor Waller.
Thank you. I'd like to report that petition 222 has been completed. Right. The estate manager was appointed the 3rd of the 10th, so that is responded.
Very good. Does anyone else have any other comments? Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about petition 211, which is called Plant-Based Council, which is all about, it says in it, it's about greenhouse emissions, biodiversity loss. It's about the council's commitment to be carbon neutral in its own activities, you know, net zero goal by 2030. There's very little information about where this petition has gone, but even though it has no mention of health whatsoever, it seems to have gone to the Director of Public Health and the Executive Member for Health. None of the actions in the petition, there's no information about any action that's been taken on any of the requests in the petition. It just says letter sent and response received. Well, who sent a letter to who about what response? Like, I'm not sure that this, even though it's like 3 or 4 pages in the papers, I'm not sure it tells us anything at all about where this petition went or what was done with it.
Fair point. Fair point. I think that would benefit from some further explanation. Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, just very briefly. I'm not sure why some petitions that have been classed as not petitions because they've got less than 10 signatures have been recorded, and presumably other ones have just been, you know, knocked away. And I would argue that if it's not a petition by the definition that the council has, then I don't see why it's appeared on the schedule of petitions. Because we will have fed back to the person sending it in to say this doesn't count as a petition. So that's an observation. And then the other observation I would just have, I think it is helpful particularly where there's some larger petitions where not all the signatories are from within the local authority area, to acknowledge that. And I don't know how easy or otherwise it would be, but presumably we've been able to say that because we've got some access to the postcode data or something or other. I don't know whether it would be helpful to have a proportion breakdown, because you could potentially have a petition of 500 people, of which 499 were from outside the area, but it could still potentially get recorded here. And likewise, you might seek to dismiss a petition because not everyone's from within the area, but actually it's only 3 people out of 500, or, you know, whatever it might be. So just that extra little bit of context, if we can do it easily, might be helpful.
Yep. Any other point, Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I mean, it's a repeat of the comments on the previous item, which is that just looking through it, I'm not sure that this reflects what it should reflect. We've got things that are closed that I'm not sure that the actions really happened, or even that like it's been much more than acknowledged. And then we've got, for example, 213 says action to be considered in June 2024 is still open with no comment. I don't quite see what the purpose of the output of it is. And also petitions aren't motions in terms of here's a specific action you have to take. So us responding to the petition saying it's going to be looked at is the only tracking we probably need to do on it. But it's good to then be able to see that followed through. So I'll take that offline again as well. But I'm confused by what exactly we want to accomplish and why it's not consistent across each item.
Yeah, I think it's as much to assure those who either organised and or signed the petition that it did just go on a shelf. It's, you know, being considered, but that might be a, you know, it was noted when there was an executive member decision on double yellow lines. This one was noted, it was considered, it wasn't progressed, but at least there's an awareness that it's gone somewhere and something's happened to it. That's another constitutional thing that needs sorting out, because we don't decide what happens to the petitions. It goes to the relevant service area. We just have an overview as to what has happened to them. And if none of them are going anywhere, then yeah, that would be up to us to say what's going on. Councillor Eyre?
Yeah, I think just put it in context, I think this motions and petitions, going back, the council was very, very bad at tracking what happened to motions and petitions. That's not to say we're now fantastic at tracking both of them, but we were in a really bad place. And this has got us to a significantly better place. And it probably is a good time to look at it and go, right, at least now we know what's happening with them. To a certain extent, what is the next step in the improvement journey?
Lindsay, do you want to
Yes.
say anything?
Thanks, Chair. I did just have a couple of updates. So I think someone's already mentioned that petition number 222 has now been closed. But I also wanted to update on petition number 213, which I think has just been discussed. I'm advised that is also now closed. A paper went to the executive, the supplementary planning documents item on the 12th of September, and it was encapsulated within that. So 213 and 222, I'm advised, are now closed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So any further detailed comments on the petitions, if feed those into me, and then when the Vice Chair and I sit down with Dem Services to have another look at this. We can make sure everything's captured and we're in a good place. Thank you. Agenda item 10, work plan. So looking at what we've got coming up in December's meeting, it's slightly unravelled. So we might have a really short meeting to counterbalance this very long meeting. So the York Climate Commission, there's some confusion as to whose report it will be. Will it be the council reporting on the sort of refresh of the Climate Commission? Will it be the Climate Commission reporting on its work? I think at the moment I'm not sure, but discussions are ongoing as to who will produce a report and attend to present it. I think there is interest in the Climate Commission. There was an event during York Environment Weeks where there was myself, Councillors Kent, Revilius and Pavlovic, and a lot of people were interested in the Climate Commission, which is a good thing. And there was certainly a desire to know more about its work. So I am keen that we do take that item if we possibly can. Otherwise, we're just looking at finance and performance monitor Q2 and an update on the York Central major project. And depending on the sort of current ongoing issues with the project, I'm not altogether sure what the scope of that report would be. But I'll keep members posted. It does leave us with a very heavy January agenda, and I might need to look at that again because we've got carbon offsetting, insetting. We've now got the social value procurement item has moved from December, and then the update on the scrutiny review. There may not be an awful lot to say about that because the review will have not long concluded and probably won't have reported. So that one may drop, but yeah. We'll keep an eye on it to make sure we've got a realistic agenda, but it may mean that December's may be quite light, but that's may not be too bad a thing. So that's work plan. So if no one has any comments on that, urgent business, we don't have any. So 20 to 9, thank you very much for your participation. We had a lot to go through, and I think we'll learn for the future in terms of talking about budgets does require a bit more time. Thank you, everybody, and good night.